Due to the graphic nature of the personal accounts and content discussed in this podcast, listener discretion is advised. Many episodes will include graphic personal accounts and discussions of child sexual assault, domestic violence, physical abuse, rape, sexual situations, and suicide.
I don't believe in saints. I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white and light. It's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore.
Welcome to Latter-day Survivors. This is Kindra, and Christina is here with me today. And today we don't have a guest, so Christina and I are the guests and also the hosts. And today we actually decided that we're going to have a conversation around something that we've been discussing, and I'm going to let Christina introduce the topic.
Okay, so Kindra and I, we talk every day actually. And we go down a lot of rabbit holes with our conversations. And we often say, we should be recording this conversation because other people will want in on it. And so we finally decided we're going to do it. And the topic that we've been talking about in the last week or two is this idea of ritualistic sex abuse. And I guess we should start by saying we both have ADHD. It's late in the day. Our meds have worn off. So our brains are a little scrambled. And you're going to get an inside look at the deep places that we go in our conversations. And
Yes.
if it turns out too messy, then we just don't even have to publish it, right?
Right.
We can just edit. It's fine.
Yeah.
I don't even know how this topic came up exactly. Do you remember?
How did you find the PACE letter? Like it had to do with somebody, a potential guest that we've been talking to, and that I've known for quite a couple of years. But I think I don't know exactly. I think you found the PACE letter, and then we started discussing that, and it kind of made both of us rage about the cover up within the church. Yeah. And how it was like there's a document showing that there was an investigation that was requested by the church. It was an assignment.
Right.
And yet there's a lot of people that aren't even aware that this document exists or that this investigation happened within the church. It was like an internal investigation in an organization.
Actually, I do remember how we got on this topic because I was listening to a podcast, and someone in the podcast made this very, very quick mention of this PACE memo, and just kind of very quickly said, "Oh, the PACE, you probably already know about the PACE letter. It's public record," and kind of kept going from there. Yeah. And if you hadn't been paying super close attention, anybody would have missed that comment. This was the second or maybe even third time I was listening to this podcast, this particular episode, to gain some information out of it. And this was the first time I heard that. And I immediately stopped the podcast to go investigate this PACE memo. And needless to say, we have gone down some very serious rabbit holes. So the gist of this, it's called the PACE Memorandum, I guess, is the official title of it. So I'm going to pull it up here on my computer. If this is a document, let me start by saying this. I can't guarantee 100% the authenticity of this document. I'm going to start with that just to cover my bases, because I don't want anybody to think that I'm automatically assigning this document as fact. It is a document that, if it is in fact true, was never supposed to be seen by the public eye. It got leaked somehow, somewhere, and has since been corroborated for the most part by a couple of different people. but there's never a guarantee. So I just want to throw that disclaimer out there. So this is a memorandum written on July 19th, 1990 by then Bishop Glenn L. Pace. I believe he was in the presiding bishopric of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And this memo, it's the date, as I said, 7/19/1990, and it's written to the Strengthening Church Members Committee from Bishop Glenn L. Pace, and the subject of the letter is ritualistic child abuse. And he goes on, it's about a 12-page document in which he talks about investigating, as part of an assignment that he was given by the church, satanic abuse in the church. And so I'll just read the first bit here. He says, pursuant to the committee's request, the committee, and I'm adding this in here, the committee being the Strengthening Church Members Committee, pursuant to the committee's request, I am writing this memorandum to pass along what I have learned about ritualistic child abuse. Hopefully it will be of some value to you as you continue to monitor the problem. And that, of course, indicates that they're already aware of a problem and they've assigned him to look into it. And then he goes on to state that they'd already received a letter from LDS Social Services, a report on Satanism the previous year, and then another report from someone named Brent Ward, also the previous year. He goes on to say that he had met with 60 victims. He says that number could be twice or three times as many if I did not discipline myself to only one meeting per week. And I am skipping over parts because it's quite long. If you type Pace memorandum, Glenn L. Pace memorandum into your search engine, it pops up on a number of different sites. Of the 60 victims with whom I've met, 53 are female and 7 are male, 8 are children. He talks about the various states that the abuse took place in. He states that all 60 individuals are members of the church, and 45 victims allege witnessing and or participating in human sacrifice. So if that just doesn't give you pause right there, I don't know what will. He says the majority were abused by relatives, often their parents. All have developed psychological problems, and most have been diagnosed as having multiple personality disorder or some other form of dissociative disorder. And I think it's important to say this was written in 1990. That term multiple personality disorder is no longer in use. It's dissociative identity disorder. I don't know. What do you think? Should I continue reading? Sorry, that just is a notification I got.
I think you're giving a good synopsis of it, and kind of gives people context to what the letter is about. We won't publish the document on our page, but we can give the link to where the document is that we found. So, copyright, and, it says things that should not be reproduced and that kind of thing, but we'll put a link in the summary and when we publish this so that people can find it for themselves.
Yeah, you can find it. You can read it. So yeah, I'm not going to read all of it, but it's pretty bad. It's pretty hideous. He's talked to all these different victims. He says most of them are, at the time that he is interviewing them, are in age range of 20s to 30s, and they are talking about ritualistic abuse that had happened to them mostly as children. Let's see. He talks about, I think one of the biggest issues, as Kindra and I have been talking about this, and also as trauma survivors ourselves, of things that we have not experienced this type of ritualistic trauma. Let me clarify that. But other types of trauma.
As far as we know.
As far as we know, right? Yeah.
As far as what we've processed and uncovered in our history of abuse. Because as we talk about it and as we process, so I'm doing EMDR, and you and I have these conversations quite a bit. As we process and start to understand and make connections between experiences as children that we didn't know were related to some of the experiences that we're having now and the memories that are coming up. So I just want to say that as far as we know, we haven't been abused like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Often this is the case with children who have experienced any sort of abuse or trauma as kids. They repress those memories. Their brains do that for them in an effort to protect them because it's too painful. It's not safe to process and they need to survive. And so such is the case with these victims that he's talking about in this memorandum. And he goes on to say, he talks about the heinousness of child abuse. And he said, dissociation also serves the purposes of the occult meaning hidden, because the children have no day-to-day memory of the atrocities. They go through adolescence and early adulthood with no active memory of what is taking place. Oftentimes, they continue in rituals through their teens and early 20s, unaware of their involvement. Many individuals with whom I've spoken have served missions, and it has not been until later, that they begin to remember. He goes on to say the victims lead relatively normal lives, but the memories are locked up in a compartment in their minds and surface in various ways. They don't know how to cope with the emotions because they can't find the source. As they become adults and move into another environment, something triggers the memories, and consequently flashbacks and or nightmares occur. One day they'll have been living a normal life, and the next they'll be in a mental hospital in a fetal position. The memories of their early childhood are recalled in so much detail that they once again feel the pain that caused the dissociation in the first place. And I just want to give some credence to that, because a lot of people who've never experienced repression of memories find it really difficult to believe that it's actually a thing, because you'll hear people say, well, if someone was having sex with you when you were, 8 years old, 9 years old, how could you possibly not remember that? And they would swear to you that if it happened to them, there's no way they could forget such an awful thing. But we know it's true. And the more painful the experience, often the more deeply it gets repressed, because these kids have to protect themselves. He talks about the different types of things.
Before you go on.
Yeah.
What you were saying about the people that don't believe that we can't possibly repress memories and and dissociate from them are the people who either, one, haven't experienced it themselves, so they can't possibly understand what it is like, or two, have not processed their own trauma and are still in dissociation from that trauma. And maybe they won't actually feel or understand what has happened to them. And that's not to say that everybody was abused, but right. we don't understand it until we've experienced it ourselves. So discounting somebody else's experience just because you don't understand it does not mean it didn't happen. And so being open and accepting that people, if a person is telling about their experience, I've said this to you before, I believe that they believe what they're saying, and I believe that they believe what happened to them. And that's really the number one thing about this podcast, is first believing and allowing people to narrate their own story so that they can process it.
I agree. And I think you brought up such a good point when you said, just because you, not you, but the collective you, just because you haven't experienced something doesn't mean it didn't happen to someone else. And I just had a discussion with a friend of mine yesterday, the day before, just in the last couple of days. She is somebody that is newly out of the church and is kind of in the very raw state of processing her deconstruction out of and through her faith crisis. And she posted something on her personal social media account about it. And of course, because she's newly out of the church, a lot of her her contacts are people that are still in the church. And true to form, one of them came onto her comments and said, basically, well, that never happened to me. And we hear this all the time. It's like, well, I didn't experience that. Therefore, there's no way you could have experienced that. I never had a bishop abuse me. Therefore, I don't believe that a bishop could have abused you. I wasn't sexually traumatized when I was a kid. Therefore, I just don't really think it could have happened to you either. And you're right. I think step one has to be, we've got to believe people and believe where they're coming from and validate, because it's bad enough as victims that we gaslight ourselves out of our own memories, and it's such a traumatic thing to have happen to you, but it's equally traumatic to start remembering things. We tend to gaslight ourselves because if other people don't believe us, well, then can I believe myself? And we kind of say these things to ourselves. We have to believe people. And I really, really think if we can just say to people, I see you, I believe you, it's a huge leap forward in healing for them, because it tells them I'm not crazy. I'm being validated. So,
Yeah. Yeah. On that same note, it's not just people outside of the family that invalidate the other people's experience. And that's actually something that comes up in the PACE letter, that there's one child chosen to be, maybe one or two children chosen to be part of this ritualistic sexual abuse. And then they are invalidated by their own family members who don't believe that this thing could have happened in their own family because it wasn't their experience. And I can attest to that, as my own experience actually involves my sister invalidating and telling me that wasn't her experience when she was living at home. I was abused. My sister doesn't believe I was abused, or doesn't believe that it was as bad as I say it was. So she's been a participant in making me question my own reality,
right.
question what really happened to me. And until you find your voice and actually start trusting yourself and believing yourself, how can you possibly get to a point that it doesn't matter what your siblings or other people in your family say to you, as far as I believe you, and giving you information that can actually help you to process those things from their perspective of things that they observed that maybe they didn't realize were associated with the abuse. How can you just trust yourself if the other people that lived in the same household as you don't even believe you?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and not to mention just the re-traumatization that happens when you are remembering these things and you're having to deal with the pain of them, to have the people very closest to you invalidate that and tell you that it didn't happen is another secondary trauma all by itself.
Yep.
I actually met someone last year who, as an adult in their 30s, began to, they had an experience with one of their own children. Their children was their child, one of their children was victimized by someone. And in the process of helping that child heal, opened up Pandora's box for themselves. And they started to remember heinous, awful, awful abuse. But here's the kicker. They had siblings and they remembered that their siblings had also been abused. But because their siblings did not remember being abused, their siblings invalidated all of it. And this person said, I witnessed this happening to my siblings. I remember it. And they're all telling me I'm crazy because not only did they not see it, they don't remember any of it.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah,
it's a big deal.
Sorry. That's also perpetuated in the church, where there are people who have been charged with sexual abuse of children. And what does the church do? They find other members who have never witnessed this kind of thing happening, this kind of behavior happening from this person, and they give them a character witness in the form of a letter stating this person is, involved in this and this and this, and they do all these wonderful things, which is, by the way, how predators groom people around them.
Yep.
And so they couldn't possibly have done these things that they're accused of. So now we have this survivor who is coming forward and breaking their silence, or multiple survivors who are coming forward and breaking their silence, which is already hard to do. And they're being invalidated by the community in which they believe, and that they commit their time and their talents and all with which they have been blessed to this organization. They devote their entire lives to it. And the people that are supposed to be their community are betraying them by not believing that this person who has groomed them, not believing the survivor, because the person who groomed everyone around them to trust them and to believe them and that they're a wonderful and amazing person. So the survivor is often alone in the processing, alone in recognition, alone in unburying things, alone in owning the story, alone in realizing that it's not their shame. They're alone. So this is a journey for each of us as survivors that is not for the faint of heart.
Nope.
And I can imagine why people in this PACE letter have been institutionalized, not because of starting to process their abuse or remember their abuse, but being discounted and invalidated by the people that are supposed to love and care about them and believe them.
Yep. Exactly right.
We as the survivors are the outcasts from the society or from the organization and the culture that we belong to, because we're pointing out something that needs to change. And people, from my experience at this point, people who are members of the church do not like to have things pointed out that are wrong.
No.
With the organization to which they belong. So they're going to first believe the good and completely discount that anything bad can happen in this organization, which means to me that the organization has groomed all of us.
Absolutely. 100%.
We've all been groomed. It's not just indoctrination, it is grooming.
It is absolutely grooming, because so it's interesting that you use that choice of words, because the example that comes up, at the time that we're recording this, it's the end of February. And just last week, or what's today? I don't even know. It was last week, a few days ago. The big announcement came out on the news that the SEC is, the church has got to pay $5 million to the SEC for its bad practices with its money. And that's a topic for another day, but trust me, Kindra and I have
false reporting.
False
reporting. And it is intentionally hiding. This is just the pattern of the church. It's intentionally hiding money because they want the tax exempt portion of all that. And I'm not speaking from a place of understanding finances and everything, but trusting my own intuition and trusting what my belief is about the situation is that they intentionally defrauded the government of money that they should have had to pay because they're claiming tax exempt status on things that are outside of the nonprofit of the religion, basically, because they're making a huge profit on tithing dollars.
Right.
And putting it into businesses.
Yeah, it's complete fraud. And a lot of us have known this for a long time. But going along with what we were saying with this PACE letter and this whole bit about grooming, as soon as that news came out, I can't tell you how many people I heard who are active members of the church who immediately came to the defense of the church, either this was an innocent mistake, or something had been misinterpreted, or, well, the gospel's perfect, but the people aren't. Like there is no room for just accepting the fact that this happened. And the reason I believe this is so is because if I am an active believing Mormon, I know they don't like that term, but I'm not saying the whole church's name. If I'm an active believing Mormon and I accept the fact that the organization that I've committed my whole life and all of my money to is committing fraud, then that is going to force me to question everything I've ever known. That's dangerous. It's painful. We're not going there, number one. And number two, I've been groomed from the time I was born. In fact, I'm having a flashback at this moment of a seminary teacher who once said, "You defend the church and its leaders at all costs. You defend the church if you hear anything negative." This is what we're taught.
Well, doubt your doubts.
Doubt your doubts.
Doubt your doubts.
Mm-hmm. So we don't want critical thinkers, because if we had critical thinkers, they'd figure everything out. Don't think critically. Think the way we want you to think. Don't read a wide array of sources. Read only from the sources that we give you.
Yeah. Well, what do we do every fast and testimony meeting? We sustain the prophet. Or I guess it's not every fast and testimony meeting. Is it just
every general
state conference, state conference and general conference?
And state conference.
And it's the same thing with like taking the sacrament and being baptized and all these things that you raise your hand to sustain them, because everybody else around you is raising their hand to sustain them. And you don't want to bring attention to yourself and object, because it makes you a target. You're a target for everybody else. You're a target. It's just like not taking the sacrament. That little deacon that's passing the sacrament is looking at you like, "Oh, you're not worthy." And then all
deacons of a sudden I've got all kinds of judgments about you. Yeah. The deacons who are
and the deacons are actually going to keep that secret? No, please. No. They're going to go and talk to their parents. They're going to talk to each other. They're going to,
But this goes along with this idea of, this is exactly why we indoctrinate children. We have 3 and 4-year-olds who are getting up on fast and testimony meeting and climbing up onto that little stool and pulling that microphone down and saying, "I know the church is true." You don't. You're 3. You don't know the church is true. But what if the prophet said, a testimony is gained in the bearing of it? So just say it enough times and you'll believe it. Say it enough times and doubt your doubts, and then there's no room for error. This is it goes
and a testimony
along with
is
grooming.
Yeah. And a testimony is gained by parents whispering into your ear what you believe. And that's grooming right there. We're talking into our children's ears and saying to them, what they need to say. They're excited. Sometimes some kids are excited to get up on the stand and bear their testimony. And it's not their testimony. It's the testimony of their parents. So what do they say to us? They say, you can live on borrowed testimony from your parents, or lean on borrowed testimony from your parents until you gain your own. In other words, you can be indoctrinated by your parents' testimony until you learn to accept the indoctrination of the church and learn to indoctrinate yourself and keep yourself in line.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's and you and I were talking earlier before we started this about that very thing, about it sends you down all these rabbit holes, because now I look back at my own kids and how I raised my kids, and this is a form of abuse, I believe. I really do. That we're telling kids from the time they're little how to think. We're telling them, look outside of yourself for answers. Look to an invisible entity. Trust that it's there, even though you can't see it. Just believe me. Just believe me. Just keep saying the prayers. Just keep believing. it's not okay.
No. And we're not telling them how to think. Well, I mean, we kind of are, but we're telling them what to think.
Which is far more
We're not,
dangerous.
yeah, and we're teaching them not to think for themselves
Mm-hmm.
and not to trust their own intuition and not to trust their gut feeling when they don't think something's good and right.
Well, so the example that comes to mind with that is the telling girls don't say no to boys that ask you to dance at the stake dances.
Mm-hmm.
We don't teach that girl, hey, if your spidey sense is telling you that that kid is not okay, that that guy is a predator, or that guy's giving you a bad feeling, no, don't hurt his feelings. Go and dance with him anyway. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's all one ginormous act of grooming. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
It's grooming everybody to fall in line. It's grooming everybody to be sheep, you
Well,
know?
it's grooming everybody to believe that coercion is consent.
Yeah, isn't that the truth?
It's
Isn't that
it's
the truth?
grooming us from the time that we're young to believe that, our parents are going to coerce us with rewards of, if you get baptized, you get a new dress. If you get baptized, we throw you a little party. If you get baptized, you have a choice to get baptized, and we're so
Mm-hmm.
proud of you for choosing to be baptized because there is no other option.
Right.
You are a child who is at the mercy of the parents who give you approval based on the things that you do that are acceptable to them.
Well, and
It's
that
There's no
approval
choice.
is equal to survival. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I, I have to fit into this family because I count on them for the roof over my head, for the food I eat.
Mm-hmm.
I have to survive in this family unit. I got to go
Mm-hmm.
along with what they want. I have to go along with it. It's
Mm-hmm.
infuriating to me when people say, Johnny has chosen to be baptized. That's a lie.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Johnny may have said, I want to be baptized, but like you said, it's all based on coercion. What are the
Mm-hmm.
consequences if Johnny says, no, I don't want to be baptized?
Right. Right. I don't know that I've met very many families. I think I've probably met a couple families that have been very good about explaining baptism and what the covenants that they're making, what those covenants mean, and actually leaving it to their child to make that decision. But even then, like, it's not just the family; it is the ward. If
Mm-hmm.
so and so doesn't get baptized when they're 8 years old, and then they go into the next class. Is it CTR or Valiant or whatever? I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
They probably changed that too. They go into the next age group, right? They go into the age group
Hashtag
of the 9 year
revelation.
olds. Yeah,
Yeah.
they go into the age group of 9 year olds, and all the other 9 year olds are like being talked to about. Do you remember when you had your baptism day? Do you
Mm-hmm.
remember? These are the covenants that you made. Well, if that one kid says, "Well, I haven't been baptized," then
Yep.
they're ostracized by their peers.
Well,
They're
okay.
judged.
They're judged, they're ostracized, and then we also indoctrinate through song, right? So on
Mm-hmm.
the one hand, they tell you, I'm trying to be like Jesus, and Jesus is supposed to be the one we emulate, and we need to do all things that Jesus did. And then they teach you the song about how Jesus himself was baptized. So what is
Mm-hmm.
this doing to a kid's head if he doesn't want to be baptized? Well, I guess
Mm-hmm.
I can't ever be like Jesus either then. And
Yep.
like you said, he's not accepted by his own peer group. Then what happens when he turns 12 and they all want to go do baptisms at the temple? He can't do that either
Mm-hmm.
because he's not
Nope.
technically a member.
Mm-hmm.
It's all
Well,
based on this.
yeah. And indoctrination through song from the time that they're 3 years old. I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, I belong because I'm part of this group and I belong to this group. It's, I am owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I belong to them.
Mm-hmm.
They own me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and think about this when you say they own me. This church makes a really big deal out of that word covenants and promises.
Mm-hmm.
And they tell you when you make a covenant, it's an oath. you never go back on it. You have to keep it. There's these dire consequences if you don't. It's a brilliant tactic. We teach kids this idea that it's the ultimate sin to lie and to go back on a covenant or a promise that you've made. And then we skate them in there when they're 8 to make these promises. And now there's all this like guilt. And it works on adults too.
Mm-hmm. But here's the catch. Like, you don't lie, but don't lie. But the church trains people to lie.
To lie.
You know, if you don't lie about masturbating, if you don't lie about whatever it is that you don't feel like you want to tell this bishop, this grown man who is sitting with you alone in their office, if you don't lie to them. So I was the kid who told the truth. I was the kid who went running to the bishop and told them when I did things wrong. I wouldn't even have to wait for my
annual interview
appointment, my annual interview or whatever it was. I didn't have to wait for that. I would have so much shame associated with like doing something that I shouldn't have done that I would go to the bishop and I would talk to them. My mom trained me to do that. Have you talked to the bishop?
Yep. But also, what did that get you? What did it get you?
It gets you punished.
Confess? That's right.
It gets you punished. You get punishment, you get ostracization. But if you lie, they don't have this discernment. There is no such thing as discernment when you have been indoctrinated into the church to believe that the church is true and that everything that you feel is attributed to the Holy Ghost. Well, you don't even know who you are. You don't know yourself. You don't trust your own intuition. You trust that everything that you feel that is in line with the gospel of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the church, everything that's in line with that is of God, and it's with the Holy Ghost, that feeling, that discernment. So you're taught what is good and bad, right and wrong, what the discernment is, but your discernment cannot contradict church teachings.
No, because you're told, well, we've asked, well, what if I pray and I get a different answer? The answer is you better go back and pray again, because God would never tell you something that goes against something one of your leaders would tell you. Once again, don't trust yourself.
Yeah. Right. And God won't tell you the Book of Mormon's not true. So if you have a bad feeling about when you read the Book of Mormon, go read it again, because you'll indoctrinate yourself to believe it eventually, because in order to be accepted into this group of people, you have to believe it. You have to profess that it's true.
Right.
So keep
saying
all
it's convoluted. It's just all, it's this like hamster wheel. They just go around and around, and you keep getting back to the same place. Try to go somewhere else, you wind up back at the same place over and over and over.
Right. Yeah. Which brings about all that cognitive dissonance. Like, I have an intuition and I want to trust myself, but my intuition is not in line with what the gospel says, so it must not be right. It must not be from.
And therefore the problem is with me, right? And that's exactly what they want you to think. The problem is with me.
Because look at all these because look at all these really smart and educated people who are all falling in line, but are they really, or are they just lying?
Exactly. The church teaches everybody to lie. You have to, as a matter of survival. And over and over and over again, as people come out of the church and they're interviewed, and they're not just by us, but just, you hear people telling their stories on all different platforms. I hear it over and over again. Well, I mean, I lied to the bishop about that. I wasn't going to confess because, I already had my mission farewell and I was leaving the next week. And if I confess that, I'd have to stay home. It'd shame to the family. It'd be this whole thing. Like, I couldn't do it. I just had to go.
Right. Or if you have sex before marriage, you can't get married in the temple unless you lie.
Right.
Unless you lie.
Exactly.
Or unless you go through the repentance process, which then takes a year, and you're disfellowshipped and publicly shamed with your scarlet letter, and everybody knows that you had sex before you were married, because either you don't get married at all in the temple and it breaks up the relationship, or you get married civilly and you still wear that scarlet letter because you didn't go through the temple.
Exactly. Exactly. But you can abuse a child and get a smack on the wrist. Like, that's perfectly
Well,
okay. Something that's
you can,
non-consensual.
right. You can abuse a child and lie about it until you've abused millions of children, not millions, until you've abused hundreds of
Dozens,
children
hundreds,
or tens
and then
of whatever. Yes, dozens.
and there begs the
And you
question,
keep lying about it until you're caught.
where was the discernment? Where was the discernment for those kids, those victims? Where was their discernment? You know, well, it must have been God's will, because free agency. And they'll throw that in at you
Right.
too. Well, there's free will, and they have an answer for everything. It just pisses me off. There's an answer
because
for
the gospel
everything.
is perfect. The gospel is perfect. People are imperfect.
Right. Yeah.
And like you said, where is the discernment?
It's
where is the discernment?
There is no discernment. Speaking of the gospel is perfect, the people are not perfect. It's kind of funny because we just did an interview with our other co-host, Sarah, and that one, at the time we're recording this, hasn't aired, but it will be by the time we publish this. Sarah said something so brilliant in that interview. She said, I like to say the people are perfect, the gospel is not. So I propose that we switch it around and we start saying that, because this gospel is far from perfect. In fact, it is the polar opposite of perfection.
Right. As evidenced by documents like the one that we're talking about today, if it is in fact a true and, a correct document that has been covered up by the church, it shows that they're willing to do the research, but they're not willing to own it. They're going to lie to all of us, which we're used to, because we're used to lying to ourselves and lying to the bishop, and learning that lying gets you what you want and telling the truth gets you disciplined. And if you think about it, when children disclose that something has happened to them, what do the bishops do? They go and they talk to the predator, and of course the predator is going to lie. So then it's just all a misunderstanding.
That's right. He didn't,
because the child misunderstood.
He wasn't touching you like that. It wasn't that.
Right. And I think the predator is gonna lie through their teeth, because they're never gonna own it until they're backed into a corner.
And as you said earlier, they've already groomed all the people around them. So they've got this beautiful reputation. Nobody's going to question it. Well, I never have had that experience. I've never seen him act inappropriately with anybody. Therefore, it just possibly couldn't have happened.
Right.
It's all convoluted. It's all a mess. And going back to this PACE memo, as you read through it, it's a long memo. But if in fact it's legitimate, I feel like you could feel Glenn Pace's sadness and
cognitive dissonance of his own.
You could feel it. He doesn't want to believe it's true, but he comes out and says, there's too many people. There's too many accounts. I can't not believe these people. And then he goes on for another 8 pages and cites scripture to back up his own findings. Like he uses the church's own scriptures. This garbage has gone on in the scriptures in previous times. Why wouldn't it happen now? Speaking of which, I suspect when you're talking about satanic ritual abuse that there's going to be a lot of naysayers. And if I'm being frank and honest, when I first heard about this, my immediate gut reaction was, what? Like, really? Like, how is this stuff going on under people's noses and nobody knows about it? But then you have to think to yourself, like, how does any abuse go on under people's noses and they don't know about it? Because they're taught to hide and lie, and they groom and they dissociate, and they, it's a big problem. So you and I were talking.
If you take out the word satanic, and just use the words ritual sexual abuse, because it's evident that in the PACE letter, it's saying I think you had told me this. I didn't read this part. I think we had
Uh-huh.
talked about this, that it was that the abusers use Satan as the scapegoat, basically. They make children believe that this is satanic ritual abuse, where it's satanic,
Mm-hmm.
but it's being done by members of the church. It's
Mm-hmm.
being done by Christians.
Mm-hmm.
So they're making it, it's even more layers of cognitive dissonance, where people believe that this was satanic abuse, so it couldn't possibly be memories related to the church. It couldn't possibly be memories related to, this gospel that is true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I felt like that was important, because we went
No.
down a little rabbit hole of ritualistic abuse versus ritualistic sexual abuse, and I think we can talk about that in a minute. But
Well, yes, and we talked about also along that same line, what is ritual? And
mm-hmm.
the I had was reading in a document about, I had said to Kindra when we were discussing all of this that I wanted to kind of do my own research and go down my own rabbit holes. I wanted to see if I could find more evidence. Is this letter legitimate? And I believe that I've found enough evidence that I believe that it is, but I'm not going to claim to know that it is. But in the process, I did find a document from an investigator in the FBI who, it was written in 1992. And he is somebody that, let me see, he says, well, I'll tell you just to, in the essence of making sure you know where I get my information from. You can find this online. It is from a .gov address. It is titled, it's from the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. It's titled Investigators Guide to Allegations of Ritual Child Abuse from January of 1992, written by Kenneth Lanning, a supervisory special agent at the Behavioral Science Unit for the FBI in Quantico, Virginia. That's a mouthful. He goes and talks about rituals and sex abuse and all kinds of things. And one of the things he talks about that Kindra and I talked about was this idea of what is ritual. And he says that during most training conferences, ritual has come to mean something along the lines of either satanic or spiritual. But really, we know now that ritual can be anything. When you get up in the morning, some people get up in the morning and they meditate. That's ritual. They get up in the morning and they may do the same little thing every morning, like get up, maybe use the bathroom, make some coffee, pray, meditate, maybe do some yoga, do the morning crossword, whatever it is that people do. A lot of people will have kind of this same routine that they do every morning because it initiates them into their day. That's considered ritual. And we know that ritual is important in cultural practice. Ritual is important for humans in day-to-day life, rituals of all kinds. And he goes on to ask these questions about ritualistic abuse. And it really makes one think. Oftentimes, people only see something as negative when it is outside of their own belief system. But when it occurs inside of their belief system, they choose not to see it. So here's an example. Is it abuse to have your children pray to God every morning? You could flip that by saying, is it abuse to have your child pray to Satan every morning? And who determines yes or no, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a list in there that I think it would be really cool to read the list.
I have it. I'll read it.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something before I read that?
No, it just really made me think when you brought that up. I mean, honestly, like, what is ritual? What rituals are good and, help us to stay focused and on task and help us to come back to ourselves and help us to, meditating with our own thoughts versus being told what to do by an organization, what makes you worthy. So to me, ritual at this point in my life, ritual that makes me know myself better and makes me a better person are things that are beneficial to me, and the things that other people tell me I have to do to be worthy or to make it into the celestial kingdom, or to not wear a scarlet letter at church, or to believe that I fit into a group, are damaging and indoctrinating.
Absolutely.
And coercive. Yeah.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point when you've said it more than once, the things that bring me back to myself, instead of taking me to all these other outside places and outside sources.
Right.
It's a
And
great
attributing our feelings to something outside of ourselves and giving credit to something outside of ourselves versus trusting our own intuition, trusting how we feel about it, and attributing that feeling to our gut, because we have within us intuition and understanding of good and bad that has nothing to do with the morality that is placed upon us by religion.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Exactly. Well, and then when that outside entity either isn't there or falls through or doesn't come through for us, where does that leave you?
It's my fault. Mm-hmm. I'm not worthy.
Always.
I haven't been reading my scriptures enough. I haven't been following all these rituals that they tell me that if I do them, then I will be worthy and I will be able to hear and attribute these feelings to this Holy Ghost or, discernment.
Exactly. That's right. It always is going to come back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So reading this list of questions, he says he's talking about is all ritualistic activity a crime? And he says almost all parents with religious beliefs indoctrinate their children into that belief system. So then he says, is male circumcision for religious reasons child abuse? Most people probably would say no. But the follow-up question is the religious circumcision of females child abuse? And I know a lot of people that would have said no to question number 1 will say yes to question number 2. Why is that? Is it because you were brought up differently? Is it because your belief system is different? What is the difference between circumcising a boy and circumcising a girl? Really, what is the difference? Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'll just go on and read the rest of these questions and I'll leave the commentary till the end. But he says, does having a child kneel on a hard floor reciting the rosary constitute child abuse? Does having a child chant a satanic prayer or attend a black mass constitute child abuse? Does a religious belief in corporal punishment constitute child abuse? Does group care of children in a commune or cult constitute child abuse? Does the fact that any acts in question were performed with parental permission affect the nature of the crime? Many ritualistic acts, whether satanic or not, are simply not crimes. To open the Pandora's box of labeling child abuse as ritualistic simply because it involves a spiritual belief system means to apply the definition to all acts by all spiritual belief systems. And I'm not, everybody's got their own system and everybody's allowed to teach their kids what they want to teach, but it makes one think. It could be anything. It could be witchcraft. It could be Buddhism. It could be whatever, fill in the blank. Are we indoctrinating our kids when we are telling them what to think and not how to think?
Mm-hmm. And are we indoctrinating our kids because we ourselves have been indoctrinated? Because we don't know how to think. And because when we attribute a feeling to ourselves versus something outside of ourselves, then it's cognitive dissonance to not attribute that to yourself, but then to also attribute something that is your intuition when you do feel that thing, saying that it's wrong because it goes against what you've been taught. So when is it right and when is it wrong? I had the hardest time when I was a kid discerning, we're going to use that word again, discerning between when the Holy Ghost was telling me something versus when Satan was influencing my thoughts. So as a child, I'm having this war inside of me of trusting myself or trusting something outside of me that is not consistent and that is only consistent with the beliefs of this one religion. And we know that there are many different religious practices all over the world. And the church tries to say, all religions have truth, but only our religion has all the truth. So if we're indoctrinated to believe that, and I'm sure other religions also do some of that same indoctrination, if we're indoctrinated to believe that this one organization has all of the truth, and we go outside of it because we are trusting ourselves or we have a feeling that is against what the church teaches, then we are wrong and we are bad and we have work to do. So then it goes back to the ritual. I need to overwork myself and overschedule myself and also have expectations of my children and everyone in my family that they may or may not want to participate in, but I'm going to require that they do to be a part of this family or to be accepted by the family. If they choose not to, then they are ostracized, they are criticized, they are told that they're wrong and that they have to do it anyway.
Yeah. It really, really, really messes with your head. And
well, we talked about religious Stockholm syndrome at one point.
We did. That's
right? So if our parents who have been indoctrinated are our captors, and they are telling us in order for us to have love and acceptance, in order for us to feel safe and to feel loved and to be given, favor, that we do these things, then we're going to do those things, or we're going to completely rebel and be completely ostracized and outcast from the family, and everyone in the family is going to believe you're a black sheep. Everyone in the family is going to believe that you're wrong and you're bad and that they should not associate with you by the time that you're an adult because you're just a bad kid. And quite honestly, I'm the bad kid. My sister does not want her children associating with me, but yet it is a double-edged sword, or it's not. I don't know if that's the right word. It is. It's a hypocrisy because she doesn't really want me associating with her children and probably tells them not to associate with me, but yet she can call my children, who are all adults, and they can make their decision to talk to her or not. I'm not going to interfere with that. Like, if they ask me my opinion, I'll tell them. But my sister can contact my children and try to maintain some kind of relationship with them under the guise of, you need to come back to church. You need to come back to church. You need to come back to church. She did it to my brother at my dad's funeral. It's time for you to come back to church. My brother hasn't gone to church since he was like 14. He actually had it right from the very beginning. But we're all made to believe my dad, who drank alcohol, was bad. My brother, who decided to leave the church, was bad or was making bad decisions, and I shouldn't associate with him. I lost so many years with my dad and with my brother that we're right.
Yep.
They had it right.
They had it right.
And I was threatened and coerced into being a part of this religion where I learned to lie, and I learned that if I tell the truth, then I'm still an outcast.
Yep. It's so true.
So there's no winning. You can't win.
There's no winning. There's no winning.
You either deny yourself or you deny the church.
Well, and we know
you can't have it both ways.
You know what we're taught in the church. We've already said it. Church first. Defend the church at all costs. So many people have had family members say they'll choose the church over their own family members. Yeah.
I've said that.
Mm.
I have said that. I've said that
Mm-hmm.
to my husband.
Mm-hmm.
I've said it to him. I said to him, I would choose my eternal salvation and the church over our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine the damage that that did to our marriage?
Right.
It wasn't
But
the only thing that damaged our marriage, but
right.
that
But it certainly
is this
contributed.
whole cognitive dissonance of not, it's not just not choosing myself, it's not choosing my partner, and it's not choosing my children and loving them unconditionally, because all the love in the church is conditional. It's conditional all the way up to Heavenly Father.
Mm-hmm.
His love is conditional in this church.
And they taught us to do this to our own kids. And it's I say all the time, there are very few things in life I have regrets about. I think everything I've gone through, everything I've experienced has brought me to where I am today. That's the sticking point for me. That's where it still stings and it still hurts, is that I hurt these kids. And you know, things are okay now, but they're okay. I can't say they're phenomenal, because they have their own challenges to this day as grown people, some of which is a direct link to what I raised them in. And you know, I don't want this to be some sort of like pity party. You and I have talked about this. You know, we have to have grace for ourselves. We did the best we could with what we knew at the time. But they teach us to tell our kids who they are, instead of us asking our kids, who are you? Instead of bringing these babies into the world. And it's kind of interesting because I work with babies as a nurse. And, you know, ever since we've had these conversations, it's kind of interesting because sometimes I'm doing these assessments on these babies and I'm listening to their hearts and their lungs and I'm checking them out and I'm doing all these things and I'm talking to them. And one of the things I sometimes say out loud to them so their parents can hear, I usually, when I meet a baby for the first time, will say happy birthday, because that's just my thing. And when I pick them up and look in their eyes, which I always do, I say, who are you? Tell us who you are. And I just want to plant that seed in every parent that I come across. Like, let your children tell you who they are. Let them figure out who they are and tell you who they are, instead of you telling them who they're supposed to be. Because I would venture to guess nearly 100% of the time, we're all wrong. We're all wrong.
Absolutely.
I was way wrong about my kids.
Yeah. On that note, with having that guilt and shame with raising our children the way that we believed was right, we talked about giving yourself grace, but all three of my children left the church before I did. And I don't necessarily attribute that to myself, except for that I feel like despite the church, I feel like I've taught my children how to think and how to be accepting and loving of other people, regardless of who they are or what they believe. And I did that being in the church. And so that's a little pat on the back to myself. I think that
Absolutely.
I still had that humanity in me, and that's who I am, despite who I've been told to be. But when my children left the church before I did, my response, my internal response was, what did I do wrong? Which then implies to my children that they aren't what I want them to be. They aren't who I expect them to be. And then on the other note, when I left the church, my children were accepting of my decision. They were happy to see that I was able to get out. They were happy to see that I could see their point of view and that I could come out of this indoctrinated coercive system where I can actually speak what I believe, truly what I believe, who I am, what my values are as a human being, not as a member of an organization. I'm able to speak those things much clearer now, and I'm still determining those things. I'm still figuring things out, but I'm able to say those things now and actually see my children and want to know who they are,
Mm-hmm.
not have an expectation of who they are. And we're still learning together. Like I think they still believe that I have certain expectations of them, but I expect them to be good people.
Right.
I expect them to be happy. I want them to be happy. I expect them to have challenges and to, sometimes handle them poorly and sometimes handle them really well and learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I expect them to listen to their own intuition.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that they think that my expectations of them are much more specific than they really are, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm having a great time with my kids now figuring out who
Same.
they are as they
Yeah.
figure out who they are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want them to be anything different than who they want to be and who they are.
And I just
So,
want to be the safe place for them to land. You
mhm,
know, you're going
yeah.
to screw up, you're going to have challenges, but we can work through them together
hmm
because
and
it
like you've
doesn't matter
said,
to me.
hmm
Yeah.
hmm and like you've said, and I've said the same thing about the greatest compliment anyone can give me
Mm-hmm.
is that they feel safe with me. And that
Hands
includes my
down.
kids.
Yep.
That
Hands
includes my
down.
kids. If my kids can come to me and tell me something that is personal and private and scary, and, that they messed up, that they feel like they messed up, and they're able to disclose that to me, you
Knowing
know,
that you're going to keep that information safe and love them through it.
hmm yeah, and want to know about whatever experience it was and talk about it, and talk about it without judgment or without expectation of what they should have learned from that experience, but hearing what their perception is of what they've learned from that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Being there, being a person who they can talk to,
Mm-hmm.
is that they feel safe coming to me now. I don't feel safe going to my mom necessarily and
Right.
talking to her about all the things. I do tell her about a lot of things, but I don't believe that she doesn't have some level of shame
Well,
involved in that.
and probably some sorrow, right?
Yep,
Because
yep,
oh no, you're not going to make it back. Oh no, if you
yeah.
make that decision, like we're going to have an empty seat at the table. Oh no.
Mhm,
So even
mhm.
though for so many people out there, their parents may be able to say, okay, thanks for sharing that with me. You still feel like you've inflicted some sort of pain for them. And that's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
unfair. It's
And
so
I
unfair.
and yeah, and I feel that from both sides,
Mm-hmm.
because as a daughter with a mother who is still Mormon and does still, she says that she doesn't feel the way that I that I say that I think she feels, but I see it and I feel it. I
Mm-hmm.
feel the disappointment. I feel
That's the
the
word.
I feel the pain that she's feeling, even if she's not going to acknowledge that it exists.
Well, you're an
Because
empath.
intuitively and empathically, I can tell there's something wrong. I can tell there's some hard feelings there, and admittedly, I'm telling myself a story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling myself a story about what she thinks of me, and maybe I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as she stays a member of this organization that teaches that
Mm-hmm.
and that indoctrinates women to have conditional love for their children, I can't imagine that it would be any different than how I felt when my children left the church, and the sorrow and grief that I felt when they left the church.
Well, because there's the sorrow and the grief over they're going to lose their place in heaven. And then simultaneously, there's that self-inflicted, I didn't do a good enough job. I didn't do enough to keep them in. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a good enough
Yeah.
mom. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that self-inflicted sorrow is also a community inflicted guilt and
Yep.
shame,
Mm-hmm.
because if your children didn't go on a mission, if your children don't believe in the church, if your children didn't get married in the temple, you didn't do your job as a mother. You didn't ritualize them into, so we're getting back to the ritual, right? You did
Yep.
not do enough of making sure that they said their prayers and read the scriptures and indoctrinated themselves into believing in this. So therefore you're a failure as a mother, as a Mormon
Mm-hmm.
mother.
That's right.
So, you all of us have this as a member of the church. I think that, I'm being really, I'm saying a generalization, but I really truly believe that that feeling is there for women in the church, and maybe men, that have children who leave the church and they decide to stay.
That that that
Just
they have that they have
they
that the
have
parents.
Yeah, the parents that decide to stay in the church have some level of grief and shame
Oh
associated
yeah.
with their belief about their own ability to raise good Mormon children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Because they're like you, my children were long gone out of the church before I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I had moments of that too. That like all growing up, you know, I was taught what my dream was, right? My dream was you're going to grow
Mm-hmm.
up and get married in the temple and have babies and be the best mom ever. And so
Mm-hmm.
then when my children chose a different pathway, immediately it was like, what have I done wrong? Like, I tried so hard. Why didn't
Right.
this work? And, but, and, you know, both and, um, we've talked about this 100 times. It's ultimately what saved my life. Um,
Your
because
children, yeah.
my children did, because they got out. And I know I went through this process of, you know, when my oldest kid came out as queer, I really was 100% fine with his queerness. That didn't bother me one bit. My sorrow was in the, oh my God, what's going to happen in heaven? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I love him unconditionally. I don't have any issue with this whatsoever. But what about God? Like, what's going to happen with God? And now, of course, I'm super thankful I went through that, because that's what opened Pandora's box for me, because I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wait, just a goddamn minute here. What
Mm-hmm.
kind of parent? Like, I don't, like, I'm looking at this kid, like, he's perfect, you know? How is it that this God that created him doesn't see him the way I see him, and I'm some mortal person, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so
And you birthed him.
I
You raised
birthed,
him.
yes, yeah. And there was just never anything that I felt like he needed to change about himself, not a single thing.
Yeah.
And so that dissonance was, it was a huge, it was so much dissonance between what I was feeling as a mother compared to what this eternal father supposedly was thinking about my kid. And it didn't compute, it didn't add up.
Yeah.
And I tried to make it add up, and I tried to, oh, it's a test, it's a test, it's a test. the math was not working. And I finally realized the math was it was bad math. It's never going to work. There's no equation. We're missing
Mm-hmm.
information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a test of whether or not you choose. You choose the church or you choose your child. It's like we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about before. I'll choose my eternal salvation that
Mm-hmm.
is not guaranteed, that is not, there's no scientific evidence backing up that this celestial kingdom place exists. It's all a construct. It's all, a way to keep us obedient, and to put unrealistic expectations on all of us. But if you think about, like, right now, there's a lot of people that are leaving religion in general, but a lot of people that are leaving the Mormon church and speaking out,
Mm-hmm.
much like we are. And what has been thrown in my face by my brother, who is still a member of the church, is that the wheat and the tares are being separated, and or that are separating themselves out,
Mm-hmm.
and implying that the wheat, or the useful portion of this plant, are the members of the church who are upholding the kingdom of God, and the
Mm-hmm.
tares, or the useless members of the church,
Mm-hmm.
or useless members of society,
Mm-hmm.
are taking themselves out with the trash. That
Mm-hmm.
they're useless.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to proclaim the gospel anymore. They're not going to support it, that they are actually going to think for themselves. Not that that's what they think, but it implies good and bad. It implies us versus them.
It's a
And
division.
quite honestly, like, if anything is useless in this world, is that you can't critically think, and you can't think for yourself, and you don't even know who you are.
Right.
That, the world doesn't need a bunch of sheep. The world
Right.
doesn't need a bunch of robots. The world doesn't need a whole bunch of people who are kept in an infantile state and can't even make decisions for themselves based on evidence-based practice, wearing masks, using vaccines, those kind of things. I'm throwing my own little my own little medical, knowledge in there, but people who are only thinking about themselves but proclaim to be thinking about others.
That
They
that
when they don't
was
wear masks. Oh, sorry.
no,
When they
you go
don't wear
ahead.
masks, they're only protecting, not even protecting themselves. They're only protecting their own self-interest, and um, camouflaging that as, my rights.
Right. That was another really big shelf breaker for me, because I went through my
Mm-hmm.
big faith transition in the summer of 2020 when COVID was just in full swing. And that was one of the biggest things for me, was this. I couldn't reconcile the mask issue. That was the number one. There's plenty of controversy out there and plenty of opinions about vaccines. My feeling was, all right, fine. If you don't want to vaccinate yourself, okay, I can understand where your fear is coming from. Put a mask on and protect your neighbor. Put a
Mm-hmm.
mask on for your 85-year-old neighbor that is immunocompromised and doesn't have a choice but to go out and get groceries because she's got nobody that can bring them, or better yet, maybe offer to go get them for her. Put a mask on to protect other people. And I couldn't reconcile this idea that everybody within earshot, and I live in a very heavily Mormon populated area. It's about me and my rights, and I'm not going to do it in those damn masks. And I just kept thinking to myself, what, like basic 10 commandments, what happened to loving your neighbor? What happened
Mm-hmm.
to being your brother's keeper? What
Mm-hmm.
happened to this sense of brothers and sisters and taking care of one another? And can't you put a mask on for 20 minutes while you walk through the store? Is it really that horrific that you can't help your neighbors out for 20 minutes while you're in the store?
Mm-hmm.
That was a shelf breaker for me. Honestly, it
Yeah.
was, because all the people that were saying it, not all, but vast majority, TBM Mormons.
Mm-hmm.
My non-liberal or my non-Mormon liberal subset of acquaintances and friends were all about, let's protect each other. Let's wear masks.
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
not reconcile it. And I know it's another rabbit hole, but I'm good at rabbit holes. I also couldn't reconcile the fact that this church has a so-called prophet who happens to be a cardiac
physician.
surgeon,
Mm-hmm.
who it took 1.5 years for him to say the words, wear your masks. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you have a man that proclaims to be a prophet who's also a physician.
And have discernment. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, not just even his medical discernment, his medical knowledge, evidence-based practice.
Like, throw all the church stuff out. Like, even if like there's nothing church related, like you couldn't get up as a medical physician and say, hey, look, guys, like, social distance, wear a mask, like, wear a mask, love your neighbors enough to sacrifice and put on a mask. But they will ask you to make meals for your neighbors and go fix your neighbors' yards and go do all these other things. But he could not be vocal about wearing masks. It was a big shelf breaker for me. I couldn't make that math work in my head either.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what's interesting is that I read something about how narcissists are actually empaths, but they can't reconcile their feelings to be an empath. So it kind of turns on its head. So if you think every member of the church, and I'm not saying every member, but if we have a population of people who are probably on some degree have empathy, or many of them are an empath, but then you give them so much cognitive dissonance that they can't recognize the difference between my own intuition and the discernment that the church is telling me that I'm receiving. Then you have a group of people who are disconnected, not only from themselves, but disconnected from the needs of other people. And quite honestly, one of the things that has come from my transition out of the church and my spiritual journey and my what is it called? I can't even call it what they say it's called anymore. My faith crisis, because I don't even see it as a faith crisis at this point. It's a spiritual journey of knowing. It's a spiritual journey of knowing and of understanding and figuring out what I actually believe. And when you actually get into the point where you know yourself and you can give other people license to be who they are and love people unconditionally, including, quite honestly, people who are in prison, people who have done terrible things, people who are murderers, people who are pedophiles. I can have compassion for the people who have abused children, who have abused me. I can have compassion for them. That doesn't mean I have to accept what they've done as being okay. They need to suffer the consequences of their behaviors and their actions. But when we actually realize that we are all very interconnected with each other, that things that I do or things that I say are impacting another person that's sitting with me, believing that they don't, that they either are accepted and have a safe place with me, or they are not accepted and they don't have a safe place with me, and they have fear involved with being close to me because that scarlet letter makes them other. So we create a community where people are judging each other and people are saying us versus them, worthy versus not worthy. We create a group of people who only think of themselves, but don't realize, probably on some level, don't realize that they're doing it. Don't realize that their behavior is narcissistic. Doesn't mean that they are a narcissist, but they're brought up in an organization that is very narcissistic. Don't question me. It's us versus them. The people who speak up are scapegoats. I mean, if you go through a list of narcissistic type behaviors, the church checks off almost every single box. The church organization, the leadership in the church checks off almost every single box. You leave the church and you can't leave it alone. You leave the church and you are an apostate. You leave the church, and this is a great one. My brother has said this to me. You're an anti-Mormon, which when I was a member of the church, that was like, you're an anti-Mormon. You're not a credible person anymore. You are unworthy. I can't listen to you because
it's a
you speak.
compliment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You speak ill of the Lord's anointed. You don't blindly obey everything that you're told. You don't blindly believe it, and then if you don't believe it, you can't just put it on a shelf until you gain a testimony of it. You have to speak out against it.
Mm-hmm.
You think for yourself, so therefore you are anti-Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Yes.
bunch of people. Exactly. It's a bunch of people who are very fear-based and very us versus them. And they're going to defend themselves and their own reputation, as well as defend this organization and its reputation at all costs. If you are someone who speaks out against it, you are going to be blacklisted. You are going to be scapegoated. You are going to be made to believe, other people are going to be made to believe that you are evil. My understanding is people in my ward have been told not to associate with me.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're
I
dangerous.
am an empathetic person who has done nothing but start speaking out the truth.
Mm-hmm. But that's dangerous for them.
The truth, right, exactly. The truth is harmful to an organization that lies.
100%. You said this bit about you're speaking the truth now. You leave the church, but you can't leave it alone. Earlier I mentioned my friend who is newly out of the church who had posted something and that person said, well, that wasn't my experience. Another person on that same comment thread kind of read her the riot act a little bit and was saying that basic thing, which is, you leave, but you can't leave peacefully. You leave, but you have to go and speak ill of something that means so much to me, means so much to us. And this friend, bless her heart, speaks to me privately, and I was kind of helping her work through some of these comments. And I said, think about it. You're speaking your truth. That's all you're doing. You have the right to speak your truth. It's yours and yours alone. You have to get real comfortable real quick with people that are going to probably leave your circle. And that's probably going to be good for your growth, number one. Mm-hmm. But number two, it's so hypocritical because the same people who are coming after you for just simply speaking what you feel to be your truth are the same people who are using their platforms to preach the gospel. They're knocking on doors. They're coming into my personal space, knocking on my door to give me a message that doesn't resonate with me either. They're posting their baptism pictures. They're talking about the talks that their family members are giving in sacrament meeting. They're reposting things from prophets and apostles. I don't ever come after those people and say, why do you have to post stuff that I disagree with? That church, I don't belong to that church anymore, and I don't believe in it. Why are you pumping up something that is causing me harm and pain? Everyone has the right to speak whatever they want to speak and speak their truth, but they will defend at all costs because, again, if they leave any room for the mere possibility that anything you're saying could have some speck of truth to it, it will call into question their entire lives. They can't have it.
Yep.
They can't have it.
And you hit the nail on the head about the hypocrisy. Um,
Light the
I
world.
don't know. I don't ever go on people's posts from the church and start berating them for sharing something that's a complete and flat out lie.
Right.
I don't post on their children's baptism page and say, so you coerced your child into being baptized and you're calling it a choice. Like I could very well do the same thing to them, but I don't, because
Right.
as someone who has been a member of the church, I believed those things at one point, and I can empathize with them because I've seen both sides.
Mm-hmm.
I can see both sides. I don't agree with them, but I can empathize with where they're at and what their purpose is in doing those things, which, quite honestly, it's peacocking,
Right.
you know.
It is.
It's showing the world your feathers, but not revealing what's underneath them.
That's right. And
It's
you.
showing the world your feathers because you want to be accepted by this group that
Mm-hmm.
you belong to. It's
Yep.
not sharing what you actually think, because quite honestly, you don't know what you
Mm-hmm.
think.
Right. You're just going to say what if you just said it. It's about acceptance. You're going to say what's going to get you accepted, not necessarily what your truth is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's
Exactly.
oftentimes a big difference between the two.
Yeah. And so now that we've had this whole side conversation that
Welcome
also
to
still
our
applies.
conversations.
Right, exactly. But it still applies because we've
Yeah.
basically taken that time to explain how indoctrinated we were,
Mm-hmm.
how indoctrinated people who are in the church still are, and
Mm-hmm.
that there is this narcissistic organization breeding narcissistic behavior and scapegoating people who disagree. And
Yep.
so now it also has to do with those of us who speak our truth about what happened to us as children,
Mm-hmm.
what, childhood sexual abuse, sharing our story that then puts the organization in a bad light and actually reveals a lot of the behaviors of these people within this organization, that now we're creating a lot of cognitive dissonance for people who are still in the organization, but they can't come at it with empathy. They have to come at it with narcissism. They have to come at it from a narcissistic perspective of protecting self and organization over believing survivor, over believing the person who leaves. So if we come back to the PACE letter
Mm-hmm.
and ritualistic sexual abuse, and that the church actually commissioned someone, Glenn L. Pace, to reveal or to investigate the information that points to and proves that this thing is happening, but then buries it and hides it. They have made
Yes.
it so that the people who have been abused know that they won't be believed, even if they come forward and talk to Glenn L. Pace one at a time, once per week, and
Mm-hmm.
he feigns to believe them. He pretends to believe them. And maybe he does. Maybe he does believe them. But the purpose of this letter, the purpose of this investigation was not to stop the abuse. It
Right.
was not to prevent future abuse. It was to determine the level of abuse that's happening and how they can either get ahead of it or make it so that it doesn't actually exist and that it is discounted, and people who are the survivors are made to believe that they're crazy, which is exactly what a narcissistic organization would do.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this group of people who now have been abused, don't get the help that they need. They either have mental health issues after that, or they go on to perpetuate the abuse on other people, which is also a mental health issue.
100%.
So it has grown exponentially, this sexual abuse that happened and is happening. It continues to grow exponentially because they refuse to acknowledge its existence.
And
they
then
refuse to acknowledge their part in it.
And then the few times that they do acknowledge, what do? They
blame the victim.
They blame the victim, and their pattern throughout the years has been the same. Let's just keep this in-house. We'll take care of this internally. We're not going to report to the authorities because, if perpetrators go to prison, they won't be able to get the spiritual help that we can give them on the outside if they're in church and they're doing what they're supposed to do. It's horrifying. And one of the things I was going to say at the start was, there's going to be naysayers that say, did this really happen? Is this really a thing? But you and I talked about this earlier, and you brought up some good points. Like, let's look at the history of the Boy Scouts of America. For how many, not just years, but decades, have they been able to get away with abuse of boys hidden? And they just let's look at the history also of the Catholic Church. There's been so many documentaries that have come out on abuses that have been covered up. And what do they do with the priests? They just move them to a different parish, move them to a different city. Let's not actually hold them accountable, address the problem. Let's just move them around,
Yeah.
There are offshoot groups. There's the fundamentalist LDS, who this is just a normal part of their culture, right? Girls get married at 14, 13, that's just because that's what the Lord wants. There are other offshoots. Look at Chad and Lori Daybell. They went into their own little side note of Mormonism based on what they thought their revelation was. It's just...
So there is a document, and it is a document that's 316 pages of evidence of abuse, and how many times, there's people's names that are named as the abusers. And then there's evidence that of the knowledge that the church had and that other organizations or the law had of that abuse, but continued to cover it up. Or it also shows some of the convictions and the sentences that people have been given because of their abuse. But a lot of it is there's multiple instances that the church was aware. And to me, that's exactly what the PACE letter is. It is evidence that the church is aware of the abuse. They're aware of these 60 people that they interviewed and the abuse that they endured. And one thing that I thought was interesting about it is that Glenn Pace said not to name their abusers to him, but to name their abusers to their counselors, who oftentimes are Mormon and or are from church social services, or to name their abuser to law enforcement. But how often does that happen when you're being discounted from the time that you open your mouth?
Right.
Or in my day, when I actually started speaking out about the abuse, was told kind of the law and order situation where abused people who have been a victim of abuse are then taken through the court system and discredited because their story changes as more information emerges. That's not what you said when you first started out. Well, that's because the nature of it is that as you process things, you get more information and you make more connections. But then they try to make it seem like you were given those memories artificially.
Right.
By someone else who had an ulterior motive. There is evidence in this 316 page document naming people who have been abusers and dates and things that when they admitted their abuse or when people accused them. There's 316 pages spanning from, I think, 1960s all the way through 2017.
Yeah. I actually have
1960s
it
through
pulled up.
2017.
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
And this document has been compiled tirelessly by Deb Diener. I think that's my understanding, is that I'm sure that she's had help.
It is. Her name is actually on the title page of it. It says that it was compiled by her.
Yeah, she's amazing. And I've spoken to her personally on the phone and had good conversations with her about it. And that work is tedious. It is exhausting. It is emotionally wrecking. And I don't know exactly what her experience has been about repercussions or retaliation from the church, but I don't doubt that there was some. And I also think that, from my experience in doing this podcast, I have had to take periods of sabbatical, we'll call it. Okay. Mm-hmm. I've had to take breaks. And this podcast is not one that is meant to put out a story every week. If we have it and we're motivated and we're in a good place mentally, then we do. We put out as many as we can. But there have been periods of 6 months where there have not been any stories. Mm-hmm. Not because we don't want to, but because it is emotionally exhausting work and we have to take care of ourselves, or else this is not going to continue.
Right.
We can't possibly be on a time frame of saying, oh, we're going to have a survivor story every week. It doesn't work that way.
No,
it doesn't. And anybody who can do that or is doing that, I commend them. But I also recommend that they take time for themselves, and honor their own emotional needs, because it's kind of like being, a nurse in the ICU or a nurse in the ER or a nurse in an organization that doesn't support them, that it is defeating. And it creates symptoms of PTSD.
Absolutely.
I go through long periods of avoidance, not just of doing the podcast and listening to other survivor stories, but avoidance in like my daily life. Like I will basically
dissociate.
Right. I hunker down and I have to find other things that distract me from the heaviness of this work, because it is heavy. It's difficult to listen to the stories and to edit them. It's difficult for the people who tell their stories and then listen to their own story in their own voice. It's difficult. It's healing.
I was just going to say it's an honor to do it, but
absolutely.
But that doesn't mean it's not hard.
Right. And like, that's the thing, like the only way that I can continue doing this and that you can continue doing this is that we're supportive of each other and the space that we need to be able to say, I need to take a step back. There is no expectation of how many podcast episodes that I do or you do. It's whatever we can do while still honoring our own space. So with that, finding the PACE letter, talking about this document that Deb Diener, the compilation of sexual abuse cases from 1960 to 2017 and what the church knew. It all points to covering it up. So why wouldn't we believe that is their intention in
100%.
anything? In anything, yes, in anything that goes against what the church teaches. It's going to demonize the people that write these things. It is going to deny until they start bleeding members because of it. And then they acknowledge. It's kind of like the peep stone, right? They finally acknowledge it because people can't.
We've always taught about that.
Right. When I told my mom about that, she was like, what?
Your mom was a TBM for 70 plus years. Yeah.
Yeah. When I brought that up, she wouldn't even acknowledge that that was something that was being taught.
Mm-hmm. They
And
change.
now that she acknowledges it, if she does, now the other way was never actually taught.
Right.
It was
And
always taught this way. What are you talking about?
Well, that's another reason why I think it's just incredibly important for people to talk, because they will change things and change their stories to suit their needs on the heels of social pressure. Interestingly enough, about this PACE document, I found another newsletter from Lighthouse Ministry, which is the Gerald and Sandra Tanner Foundation. Apparently, this PACE memo was just the brief overview memo for the Strengthening Church Members Committee. Apparently, there's a 40-page report that outlines a lot more of this stuff, but we're never going to see that, because
No, of course
just
not.
like we weren't supposed to know that what were the pages that one of the prophets ripped out.
Yeah.
We weren't supposed to know that. We weren't supposed to know about the peepstone. We weren't supposed to know that there were 4 different versions of the first vision. We weren't supposed to know a lot of things. The other thing that I was reading about this PACE memo, and there's no proof of this, it's just a time thing, and the timing is uncanny, so it makes it look like they're connected. I admit that up front. We know about in the temple prior to 1990s something, they were swearing blood oaths in the temple and doing hand gestures about eviscerating themselves. Apparently that stopped in the same vicinity that this PACE memo came out, because one of the things that Glenn Pace said in this letter was a lot of these people had their first triggery memories when they went through the temple for the first time. And with the rituals in the temple, so there is some speculation that some of the things that they had been shown in their ritualistic abuse were things that you may have seen in the temple at that time.
Well, children who have been abused, people who have been abused, will dissociate and will keep the secret because of threat.
Yes, because they might
because
die.
Of
and if they've seen other
I'll
people,
kill you or I'll kill your family.
Right. Or I'll kill you just like you watched us kill this other person. And we did that on purpose to shut you up, because we're going to show you this, and then we have something on you. If you ever speak about this, that same thing is going to happen to you. Well, you can bet if I'm a 7-8-year-old kid, that's going right into the vault of my brain. It's never coming out, because that spells death if it comes out. So that's just never going to happen.
Right.
And it's exactly what you were saying earlier, going along with that. They specifically would choose 1 or 2 kids out of a large family. And it was so that when these memories came out, they would have 4 or 5 other siblings who could say, that never happened. Like, there's no, we grew up in the same house. There's no way. Discredit. Change the stories, change, oh, we're not getting our own planets anymore, Kindra, by the way, too. Just in case you missed that memo. Sorry.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Well, that whole thing also, when people talk about not getting their own planets anymore, and it's kind of a joke, but not getting their own planets anymore, and that's the reason they left the church. People in the church will be like, that was never promised. That was never doctrine.
It was culture.
What?
It was culture.
Right.
There's a difference between
and that was when the prophet was speaking as a man and not speaking as a prophet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you were faithful enough, you'd have the discernment to know the difference. So once again, this is a you problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm
exactly.
So sorry
well,
about
the temple ceremony never changes either, right? I think you might have already said that. The temple ceremony never changes. I was told that. That. It never changes. But then there's evidence online, which, the internet was created for the spreading of the gospel.
Yeah.
Did you
The
ever hear that?
jokes on them now, right? It
Yeah,
spread a lot
gosh.
more than they were anticipating. I say that all the
Yeah.
time. I always say, I think the number one downfall of the church is that they had no idea. Their discernment failed to tell them
Hmm.
just how much the internet was going to reveal. And
Yeah.
you just said, oh, there's evidence all over the internet. Hell, there's evidence of living people who have gone through the temple then and now who can tell us that things have changed. I think they said when you do
Uh-huh.
the washing and anointings that I think they wear garments now under the shield. I don't know. Um, we were
Mm.
naked. We were naked when I went through
I
it.
was naked. I
Yeah,
was I was absolutely naked, and there was a
naked.
woman touching my body
Yes, yes.
underneath the shield that was it was not even really like it was like a sheet that
Well, it
was
was
a
fully
hole in the
open on
top
the sides.
and fully open on the sides. So
Fully open.
my
Yep.
naked body is being
Mm-hmm.
touched without consent by these women. But because I'm going to the temple without knowing what I'm consenting to,
That's
I'm
implied consent.
right.
I
It's
have it
implied
in
you're
air
here,
quotes.
so therefore I can touch your body. It's like
Mm-hmm.
saying to a woman who's being raped, well, you wore that clothing, so you're telling me you want me to rape you.
That's exactly it. You just hit the nail on the head. You're telling me that you want this because you
Mm-hmm.
showed up here wearing a certain outfit. So it's the same
Mm-hmm.
thing in the temple. Well, you came here, you wanted to
Mm-hmm.
go through and get your endowments. This is part of the process. So it's implied consent, right? Well, yeah,
Yeah.
except nobody told me I was going to have to be naked and have somebody touching my naked body in the temple.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, like you're not told. But once again, they're going to tell you now that that didn't happen. They've always worn garments
Mm-hmm.
under that shield. This is
Right.
why we have to
Right.
talk. This is exactly
Mm-hmm.
why we have to talk.
Right, right. Well, it's akin to I'm going to a birthday party for a friend, and I get all dressed up, and my outfit is something that I'm comfortable in, and I'm confident in my body and whatever, and or maybe I'm not, maybe I'm a little unsure, but I'm kind of pushing the limits, right? And I'm making sure that I can, do things that make me feel uncomfortable because that thing is, helping me to get to know myself, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I do it for myself. But I go to this birthday party, and there happens to be someone there who says, "Oh, this party. Yes, it's a birthday party, but the expectation is when you get here that you're going to consent to sex." So by showing up, you consent to sex. By showing up in that outfit, you consent to sex. By showing up and drinking alcohol, you consent to sex. Um,
You're
the
told after
church
you get
does
there
it's
already.
Right, right, right. And they're
Yeah.
not going to tell you beforehand that that's what you're consenting to. You are told nothing about what the actual covenants are that you are making when you go into the temple or what they mean. Your
Mm-hmm.
temple prep classes have nothing to do with what actually happens in the temple.
That's
But
the
you're
biggest
consenting
joke in the
because you
church.
go.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
It's
You're
the
consenting
biggest
because you
joke.
go.
Temple
Yeah.
prep. Yeah, prep for
Mhm.
nothing. Well, I
Yeah, well,
don't
it's
know what
like
the
baptism. It's like baptism
right,
prep. It
right.
doesn't prepare you for baptism.
No.
You don't know what the actual ceremony is gonna be. You don't know what
Well,
you're actually covenanting to. You don't know that when you become an adult that you're going to be so brainwashed and gaslighting yourself that you actually can accept that going into the temple without, and going into the temple and being touched on your body and having to covenant to things that you had no idea you were covenanting to under the
mm-hmm,
under the threat of the scarlet letter that you would have from both
mm-hmm.
your family and the other members of the church, that you don't leave, but you're told you can leave. You're told you can leave.
It's yeah. I remember the moment I went through the first time and that was said. I
Mm-hmm.
remember the moment of dissonance when I heard them say, like, if you're not, this is like your last chance. If you're not going to commit, like you have one last chance to turn around and walk out the door. Just raise your hand in front of
Mm-hmm.
everybody and we'll have someone escort you out in front of everybody. This is your
Yeah.
opportunity. Cause once we shut the doors, once this is it, then you're locked in. And you better keep these commandments for the rest of your life, these promises for the rest of your life, or, really awful things are going to happen to you. We're just not going to actually tell you what they are. I guess they just changed some things now in
They
the temple
did.
where
They changed it. Yeah. So
uh,
they
so
tell
now it
what you're
looks
covenanting to before they say you can leave if you
okay.
would like, but
Right.
still,
It's still
you're not going to
an
leave.
illusion. Yeah.
You're not going to leave because you're there with ward members. They have ward nights and stake nights at the temple. These are your
Yeah.
peers. These are all people that if you leave because it makes you uncomfortable, if you say no to being held to these covenants, then you're basically outcast or
Yeah.
judged
Shunned.
harshly. Yeah.
Shunned.
Yeah. It's not
And
consent. It's
it
not
might
consent.
not be
It's
a physical
coercion.
it's coercion. Consent
Yeah.
by coercion.
Yeah.
And you might not be physically shunned, but you're certainly going to be emotionally shunned.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And but all visitors welcome, right?
All
And
visitors
and
except if you're gay. All visitors
or if you're an
except
apostate.
or if you're an apostate, you're not welcome. Just everybody else.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so convoluted.
Well, I mean, I could go to my ward and I could stand at the stand at the what is it called? The pedestal?
The pulpit. The
podium. I could
podium.
stand at the pulpit, the podium, whatever, and I can bear my testimony because technically I'm still a member. They haven't excommunicated me.
Same.
So I'm still a member in good standing.
Well, I don't know about that, Kindra.
Hey, nobody has told me that I'm not. Nobody has told me that I'm not. Nobody has asked me. The bishop doesn't ask me to come and talk to him.
That's true.
They haven't called me into the bishop's office to
He knows that you're not paying
me.
your tithing, though.
Yeah.
So there's
I did stop doing that, which means that I can't go to the building that requires membership dues.
Right.
And subject myself
dues,
to,
as my ex-husband would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The what?
The
membership dues?
No, my ex-husband used to call it the country club dues.
Oh, right.
He used to, and I used to just be so horrified every time he'd say it. He'd be writing the bills out for the month and he'd be like, time to pay the country club dues. And I'd get so mad at him. And then he'd say, and don't forget, we've got to wear the team underwear.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Right. But the thing is, is it really a voluntary contribution to a
Not
charitable cause?
No.
If what makes you a worthy member who will go to the celestial kingdom is held hostage by your tithing.
Correct.
You're coerced into paying tithing.
It's consent by coercion. I'm sensing a theme here.
Right. Everything is coercion. So now we, coming back to the Pace letter, coming back to the idea that ritualistic abuse is anything that is required of you to maintain your standing or your membership in a community or your good standing in your family by coercion or threat.
And Kindra has summed up quite beautifully, I might add. That is the theme of everything. Every single thing we've talked about. It is ritualistic abuse done under the guise of coerced consent. Mm-hmm. It's all of it is ritualistic abuse. All of it.
Uh-huh. And threat. There's coercion, coerced consent, and threat. Mm-hmm. What is child abuse? What is child sexual abuse? What are children told? They are coerced. They are told that they wanted it. They are then threatened that if they speak up, that they will, their family will be hurt, or somebody will be killed, or they will be killed, or that nobody will believe a stupid little girl like I was told. It is divisive and creates an us versus them mentality. And it makes it so that victims and survivors feel like they are alone and isolated, and that they're the only ones that this happens to. So, or that did happen to. So then we as survivors don't
Silent.
talk. We silence
That's right.
ourselves, and we
Right.
gaslight ourselves into believing that it never happened, or that
That's
it
right.
wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And as long as we gaslight ourselves and indoctrinate ourselves, it's all the same thing. We're making ourselves believe something in order to belong, or to not be ostracized, or to not be criticized, to not be re-victimized, to not be invalidated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all out of fear.
So true. I had a thought while you just
You
were
did.
saying that. I know. Surprise.
I like Christina thoughts.
I know you're so shocked, right? This is actually, I think this is a good thought, actually.
I like your thoughts.
Thank you. I not through personal experience, let me start with that. I know a thing or two about human trafficking, partly because I'm a nurse, partly because it's a subject I've studied, partly because I served on a human trafficking trial as a juror. I learned a lot about human trafficking. And do you know, in a court of law, what 3 things you have to prove to call to be guilty of trafficking? Force, fraud, and coercion. Those are the 3 things that will, if you can prove force, fraud, and coercion, you can be found liable and guilty of human trafficking. I will throw the caveat in there that those things don't have to be proven for anyone under the age of 18. But for adults, force, fraud, and coercion, if you can prove them, you've got yourself a case. What is the foundation of the church? Force, fraud, coercion, all of it.
So the church is basically an organization of human trafficking, creating an army, we'll call it, that can't think for themselves, that are a bunch of robots, that are a bunch of sheep, that are humans kept in their infantile state, that cannot make decisions that are informed decisions for themselves because they are refused or threatened to not go and get that information from credible sources, because those credible sources may contradict what the church tells them. Threat.
And it's working because
it is.
Hashtag hundreds of billions in assets.
Yeah.
It works. It works to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars.
And who gets the benefit of that hundreds of billions of dollars? Hold on. I have the answer. I have the answer. You ready?
I'm so ready.
Mormon Jesus.
Yes! Because
coming back.
The second coming is coming. And when he comes back, we're going to have hundreds of billions that I'm not really sure what we're going to need for, because Jesus will be here to work all the miracles, and there's going to be peace on earth and the United Order.
Not goodwill to men. No.
But the United
if you think
Order,
about it, right? Well, that's socialism.
I know.
But members of the church do not believe in socialism.
No.
No. That's communism. And communism is bad. And
it's so
the cognitive dissonance that
convoluted.
And right now we will be labeled as Antifa, and I will wear that label proudly, because I am absolutely anti-fascist.
Yes.
And so people who fling that word around like Antifa is bad, have no clue that they are fascists.
Right.
Guess who else was a fascist? Hitler.
Ding ding. Yes.
Ding, ding. So we have a bunch of people who are little mini Hitlers. And we don't think the Holocaust is going to happen again? It
I'm
is absolutely
laughing,
going to happen
but
again.
of course it's going to happen. Come on. Just look at the teachings. Like, I mean, Hitler was the guy who marginalized an entire group of people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
What has the Mormon church done?
Hmm.
Let's think about that. If you're
Yeah.
gay, oh,
Hmm.
but we love
Hmm.
everyone. We love
Oh,
everyone.
but don't say gay. Don't say gay.
Oh, bad word. Naughty, naughty.
No,
Oh,
I mean the
I know.
Florida law, right? Don't say
Right,
gay.
right.
Well,
Don't say gay.
Utah right now is trying to do that also, but have come under quite a bit of backlash, so they've revised it. But really,
Right.
honestly, they need to just tear it up because there is no reason that we should not be able to say gay.
Right.
Like, what is that saying? That is called a First Amendment violation
mm,
because that
yes.
limits free speech.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
there's yes. And lest we forget, this is also the church that, if your skin was a certain color for the first 150 whatever
Mm.
years it was of their
Yeah.
organization, you too were
Yeah.
a marginalized. And we wouldn't want
Mhm.
the bloods mixing because that would be bad.
Right.
And
Well, we know that women are still property in the church.
yes. Mm-hmm.
They won't say that, but women are property and women are cattle and women are breeders.
Mm-hmm.
So that is our role in the
Yep.
church. But I don't feel unequal.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Equality
Now,
is not a feeling.
okay, but listen,
Equality is not a feeling.
but they are masters at this. And I'll tell you why. I
Mm-hmm.
admit wholeheartedly, I
Mm-hmm.
felt that way. I did not
I did
feel
too.
unequal. I upheld the patriarchy. When people like Kate Kelly came out and were so outspoken about
Mm-hmm.
priesthood and equal rights, I was one of those
Oh yeah.
TBMs that was like, I just don't
I
understand.
feel equal. I don't have any,
Yeah,
I
I
don't.
totally feel equal. We're different. We're equal but
Mm-hmm.
different. Like, why do they feel like they have to have the priesthood? I used to say this. I
I
wouldn't
bear
want that
children.
I wouldn't want that responsibility of the priesthood. I would
Mm-hmm.
not want that mantle placed on me because the responsibility is so large.
Yeah.
I get to bear
Yeah.
children, and that is my
Mm-hmm.
sacred responsibility. It
Right.
makes me
Right.
want to vomit now because I was
Mm-hmm.
so
Me too.
blind. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
even know that I was upholding and perpetuating the patriarchy every single day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And promoting inequality. Why isn't the Equal Rights Amendment ratified yet? Because if it was, then women would have equal rights to their bodies.
Pretty
And if
simple,
you
right?
ratify the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, then you can't ban abortion because it is a healthcare service. It is protected by HIPAA that
Mm-hmm.
women have control over their own bodies. We have
Mm-hmm.
bodily autonomy, but do we?
We do
No, we
not.
don't.
We absolutely do
No.
not. And there is a modern day witch
If there
hunt
was a
going on
law,
around that.
oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If they were to create a law where men could not have vasectomies,
Mm-hmm.
or that a vasectomy was required of men,
Right.
if there were laws around forcing men to have any healthcare procedure done or not done, these laws would never exist.
Okay, so let me twist that around for just a moment. As a nurse who works with birthing women, I have for
Mm-hmm.
the last 20 plus years, I can't tell you how many times we have had women come in who maybe it's their 14th, 15th pregnancy. They're addicted to drugs. They don't have custody of any of their children. You will hear nurses that will say, why, instead of having all these children addicted to drugs and going into the system, why can we not force her to get sterilized? She's had 15 chances. Because she has the right to her own body. That's why we're not allowed to
Mm-hmm.
force a sterilization procedure on her. We can't do it. We're not allowed
Yep.
to do it.
Well, I've heard of lots of women who, when the whole thing with abortion, the laws against people having abortions, um, since our rights have been attacked, there are women who are going and having hysterectomies, are requesting hysterectomies because they never plan on having children, or because also, heaven forbid, heaven,
Haha.
heaven forbid, they are
They get
raped. If
raped.
they get raped, which they were asking for because they consented, because they went to the birthday party with clothing
With
that
porn
is
shoulders.
telling, oh yeah, porn shoulders, and they drank alcohol, so therefore they
They
were
asked
asking
for
for
that.
it, and they
That's right.
consented to it.
By
So
coercion.
women who are raped and are pregnant then can't have an abortion,
Mm-hmm.
can't even get the morning after pill.
Nope.
So now we have a bunch of women who are getting hysterectomies, requesting those from male doctors who
Mm-hmm.
then won't perform them
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
insurance won't cover it because
Mm-hmm.
it's an elective procedure.
But we have total control over our own bodies, Kindra. I don't know what you're talking
No,
about.
no,
I
we
mean,
don't.
it's we have no control over our bodies. You
Right.
you you know, you bring up, oh, could we have another Holocaust? Well, look what's happening to our trans citizens in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that
They're
doesn't
being
spell,
denied healthcare. They're being
if,
denied. Mm-hmm.
yeah, come on. There's no such thing as
Mm-hmm.
bodily
Well,
autonomy.
mm-hmm.
Well, at
Well,
least
Utah
not
just
if you're a
passed a
woman or
bill.
you're trans. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Utah.
Utah just passed a bill. Utah just passed a bill that children under the age of 18 cannot have gender confirming medical treatment, that they
Right.
can't receive hormone therapy. And what happens again? The providers who should be able to use their judgment about these children and their parents giving consent are then threatened.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go. We have threat and
Mm-hmm.
coercion
Mm-hmm.
and
Force. But
manipulation and
don't you think
force.
it's kind of interesting though that, I mean, I know it's a controversial topic, but how is it that we're allowed to circumcise babies
Mm-hmm.
and
Because it's
literally
a ritual.
literally
It's a religious procedure.
remove, yeah, we literally surgically remove a functioning piece of tissue that absolutely does play a functional role in sexual health
Mm-hmm.
because we want it to look a certain way.
Well,
I mean, I'm
and
just
we're
saying, let's make,
also, yeah,
let's look at, yeah.
yeah. We're also taught. So we're gaslighted. We're manipulated into believing that this is something that we should be doing to babies because it's a health issue. Children that are uncircumcised get more UTIs. It's all bullshit. It's
Well,
about hygiene. It's about hygiene. It's not about making this procedure something that is actually going to help prevent disease.
well, and for a lot of people, it really is just aesthetic. I mean, that's just it. I
Mm-hmm.
work in the birth arena. I work with moms all the time. Plenty of moms out there. They don't even try to hide the fact that they were like, ew, I don't want it to look like that. Get rid of that foreskin. He has to have a normal looking penis.
Right.
Because they too have
Well,
been
and they want to
conditioned.
look like their dad. Yeah.
Right.
They don't want to be different.
The literature does show that they do get UTIs at a higher rate, but is it a high enough rate to justify surgically removing functionally healthy tissue at birth for 50% of the population? I would say no. It doesn't make any sense. If it did, I would say maybe we should just take everybody's gallbladders out when they're born because they
and
might,
their appendix too.
and their appendix, yeah. Right? I mean,
and their tonsils.
Just take it all
adenoids.
out. And the argument I used to say was, can you imagine if parents of a baby girl in the hospital said to the pediatrician, this finger a little bit like crooked. We don't really like the way it looks. Can you remove that finger? She'll still have 3 other fingers and an opposing thumb. She'll be okay, but she'll look better if we can just get rid of that thing. Can you do that? I mean,
well,
this
if we
would
use
make
the
national
excuse,
headlines.
right,
It would
right.
go to court.
If we use the excuse that we want the children, the boys, to look like their daddy, so they're not asking a question about why they look different, then we also have to use that in. I'm being a little extreme, but say mom and dad are both missing an arm.
That's right.
Well, we don't want them to feel different.
So let's take that arm off.
Right. Let's take at least one arm off.
What happens if you've got a dad that's got blue eyes and you've got boys that have brown eyes? Like, yikes. We don't want their eyes to look different. Should we just like put like contacts in them? Like, because they got to look
corneal
the same.
transplant. We need corneal
yes,
transplant.
Of course. And insurance should cover that.
Right. Absolutely. But I mean, if you think about it also with circumcision, is the increased risk of UTI really cultural conditioning and a lack of education? Or is it because children that have foreskin actually do get more UTIs?
Yeah, that's
even with education and understanding about how to care for it.
That's a good question that I would venture we would never be able to find the answer to. But I do have people that'll say that too, though. It's a hygiene issue. And I always tell them, like,
it's not.
Don't you teach them to wash behind their ears? Don't you teach them? Don't you teach girls to wash their genitalia? Should we just cut things off to make it a little easier for them?
Well, when they're circumcised, they have to care for that wound. So you can't keep that wound clean.
Right.
The body is going to take care of itself also. Your body heals itself, right? Your skin heals. Well,
the body is constantly seeking homeostasis.
Yeah. So you have a child who has foreskin. Are you going to ignore it because it doesn't look like what you've been conditioned to believe is normal? Right. Or are you going to learn how to care for it and teach the child how to care for it so that they can then protect themselves from infection?
Right.
There's shame around it.
And you can take this down so many different roads. I mean, is it okay to pierce a baby girl's ears? Right. I mean, there's all these questions that it brings up.
Yeah.
Is that going against bodily autonomy too?
And is that a ritual?
Is it a ritual? Is it?
Is it? I have my ears pierced when I was a baby.
Right. What counts? What doesn't? Where do you know?
Where do you draw the line?
Where do you draw the line? But I just feel it. We've got to leave people alone to do what they're going to do with their own bodies. And if they're not harming anybody else, why are we so concerned? Why are we so concerned about this?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
But circumcision is harmful.
Right.
You're traumatizing a day-old baby boy without any sedation.
It's just a local.
You're tying them down, strapping them down to a board.
Yes.
And subjecting them
not nice.
to... Right. And local sedation is given with a needle.
Yes.
Maybe some Emla cream or some lidocaine topically, but no. I don't think that that's standard practice.
It's not.
So you're taking a baby boy and you're having them stick a needle into their genitalia. Is that sexual abuse?
Could be construed that way.
I have a different perspective now than when my kids were born.
Yeah.
But what was my perspective based on? Cultural conditioning, religious conditioning, societal conditioning.
Yeah. And being told what to think and not to question anything or think for yourself or, anything like that.
And if boys don't even remember that, because what boy does remember it.
And I'm skeptical of that, actually.
There is bodily memory. There's
Yes,
absolutely bodily memory.
that's
Body
what I
keeps a
mean.
score. There
Yeah.
is trauma from childbirth. There is trauma from,
Yeah.
circumcising baby boys.
Mm-hmm.
And there is trauma also from believing that that's how it looked when they were born.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We just don't talk about it.
No, we don't talk about it.
So then
We
when they
don't.
realize, there's trauma also when they realize that they were subject to this procedure
Mm-hmm.
without their consent when they become an adult. They
Yep.
didn't get to decide for themselves if they
Mm-hmm.
wanted that procedure, because we try to make it so that it would be so much more traumatizing as an adult to have that done.
Right.
Then it's a much bigger procedure than it is
Right.
when you're a baby.
Right.
But as an adult, you have the opportunity to consent.
Right. Exactly.
Versus when you're a baby, that consent is from your parents.
And I just want to point out too that hygiene is the word that's thrown around. I think that's a cop out. This is a procedure that, well, it used to be a religious thing. And then when it went out of favor with religion, it became, jokingly enough, this is very funny, a way to prevent boys from masturbating. And
Oh,
I
right,
want to
right.
say, like, how well did that work?
Wait. It did, because boys in
Oh,
the Mormon church don't masturbate.
oh, because,
They just
and we
lie.
know, well, no, they don't, because I was just going to say, we know they don't masturbate because the bishop interviews them once a year and they say, I don't masturbate. I would never do
Right,
something like
right.
that.
Of course.
Not that evil masturbation thing. Come on.
Right. Mm-mm.
Yeah. So that's when it came back into faith.
Or they're like, what's masturbation?
Yes.
The bishop told me what masturbation was, Mom.
Well, so funny. Well,
which also brings up bodily autonomy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I now can't touch myself and
yes.
and discover myself and learn what my body parts do, because I've been shamed, because I've been told it's a sin, because I've been told that God, or it's the original sin. I think we were talking about this off the air. I don't think we talked about this. The original sin. So babies in the Catholic Church are baptized. What is the original sin, Christina?
Yeah, it's Eve.
Right.
It's Eve. She
having been true and faithful. Oh, sorry.
Yes, that's the one. Except I don't know if the Catholic Eve said she was having been true and faithful. I don't know if she was trying to speak through the Lord through the veil, but who knows? I wasn't there. But she did the naughty, and she partook of that fruit, and they got banished. But it's so
which is
funny.
Sex, by the way. Which is sex.
Yes, the original sin is sex. So what we were talking about before we started recording was, how messed up is it that you take the human species, or any species for that matter, human species categorically requires sex in order to propagate and to continue on,
procreate.
You take this bodily, it's necessary, and you make it evil. So basically what they're saying is, you have to have sex or we're not going to have any more humans, but it's evil and bad and nasty. So if you do, we're going to have to baptize you at birth because you were the product of an evil, nasty act. So every human then, and under that ideology, every single human came into this world under
a sinner,
as under a sinning situation. Like it's almost like there's not even any hope. You're screwed right from the start. Like you're just you're already having to repent at birth. We got to baptize this innocent baby who is the product of who their parents did the nasty. So we gotta clean them off,
Right.
It's so
which and then
convoluted.
If you think about it, absolutely. If you think about it, if you are labeling a child a sinner from the time that they're born, then that creates the idea that this child, this is where my mind is going, that this child is then, um, this is kind of a long shot, but this child is then consenting to being a product of ritualistic sex abuse because they were a sinner when they came into the world.
Yeah.
It's a thought. It's kind of out there.
Yeah.
But if you think about it,
but I see where you're going with this.
If children are sexualized from the time that they're born,
right,
because they're a product of sex and that's a sin, then we are all sexualized from the time that we're born and taught that the things that naturally happen in the human body are wrong and bad, and that we are bad because of those things, because it's a natural human need.
And it's all through childhood. It's not just Catholics with original sin, because in the Mormon church, it's don't show your shoulders. We're sexualized from the time we're little. Don't wear a 2-piece bathing suit. Don't show your shoulders. Don't tempt the boys to commit sins because you're responsible for them. Like, we are sexualized.
Women are blamed
for everything.
Women are blamed for everything. Well, it's Eve's original sin, right?
It's true.
Women have been blamed from the beginning of time, the beginning of the human race, apparently, you know? Wait,
the way I
was Eve a primate?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I actually always say now, Eve was actually a really badass woman. And the way I think of her, I imagine Eve being like, screw this. No, you're not going to tell me what to do.
Well, if you think about it, right? They were put into this garden and they had all these animals around them, right? They have animals, they have plants. They're watching the animals do the dirty nasty. They're watching the animals have sex, and the product of that is a baby animal, whatever animal.
Right.
So Eve was actually the critical thinker in the bunch, where men are just trying to get off because they realize they can get off. Eve is actually thinking, oh, okay, we've been commanded to multiply and replenish the earth. I'm not making babies just on my own.
Right.
I'm watching these animals make babies. So therefore the only way.
Are you saying that they're not immaculately conceived?
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to break that to you, Christina.
Damn it.
Eve is a badass. You're right. Eve was smart. That's why societies need to be matriarchal, because women actually have critical thinking skills in their head and don't just think with their dick.
It's so
and don't think about power and control and, and controlling women's bodies and controlling, other races of people and believing that they're better and believing that they're superior and creating war and then monetizing war and then, building these empires of wealth that then they don't share with the people that they pretend that they're serving. They build this wealth. Cough. Well, cough Mormon church, but cough religion in general. Who created religion? I don't know of a woman that created a religion. Do you?
I don't.
At least not an old religion.
Not anything that we're familiar with today.
Because what is religion? It is a governing form of controlling people. So we have a government that actually, we have a government that makes laws that we actually have to obey or work on changing through the democratic process, in quotations.
Air quotes for those that can't.
We can lobby, and we can send letters to our senators, and we can vote, which we know that our votes don't really count. So we can do those things to try to change laws. But in religion, it is eternal law.
Right.
An
And that's how they
eternal
get
law
away with
doesn't
everything.
change. Mm-hmm.
Well,
And the realization that this eternal law doesn't change, but I am not bound to it by law, that they have no power over me that is meaningful on this earth. They have no power over me. I get to decide that I'm going to stay a member of the church. So those laws being eternal are not real laws, and it's not real power, and it's not real authority. But
right.
they use what? They use threat, coercion. What were the three things?
Force, fraud, and coercion.
Force, fraud, and coercion to keep people paying into it, to keep people obedient, to keep people submissive, to keep people protecting the organization.
Yeah. That's what it's always going to come down to. Protecting the organization.
Right.
They've got to keep the money flowing. Follow the money. Come on.
Which
you can't.
We had this conversation. Yeah. Keep going. Sorry.
You're just never going to convince me that I need to pay to get into heaven, but that's the Mormon way.
Yep.
People say, oh, it's free. It's not free. It's 10% of your income for the rest of your life. I want my tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars back. I want it back.
Me too.
It's never going to happen.
Because it was given by coercion.
Exactly.
There was no consent.
Yeah.
There was no consent.
People throw that word consent around without really understanding. If there's any sort of coercion involved, it is not consent. You start to introduce coercion, consent does not exist anymore. It does not exist, period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's all coercion. Do this or outer darkness. Do this, eternal damnation. Do this, never going to see your family again. Do this, you're cut off. Those are not viable options.
No, but is it really a threat when you realize that outer darkness is freedom, and it's more fun, and it's authenticity?
I would say my peeps are going to be in outer darkness.
Absolutely.
I like the dark, so I'm good with the dark.
Yeah. 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 And going towards the family thing, is it really a threat if your family is toxic?
Absolutely not.
Is it really a threat that you're going to choose? You get to choose who you want in your life, and you get to cut toxic people out because they don't love unconditionally, because they're, they shame you and guilt you and black sheep you and make you believe that you're not worthy and
we've talked
discredit
about
you.
This idea
discredit
of
you to other people.
Family. Chosen family is, my gosh, I had no idea.
Yeah. So much better. So
much better.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but also to get to that point, you have to go through the warrior's journey. You have to go through the hero's journey. That's right. You have to go through a hero's journey, a dark night, dark night of the soul, because you can't leave a religion or an organization that you believed was with your whole heart was true, and go through a spiritual transition and find yourself without going through some type of dark night of the soul, because you paid into this organization that you now believe is wrong and not, and is doing these bad things and is coercing people and manipulating, and it's ritualistic abuse. You paid into it. So now you have the guilt of that, the shame of that, and the recovery from that. And then, you come out the other side and you go through dark nights of the soul over and over again, because every hero's journey creates conflict. And then coming out on the other side, you have realization and growth. Where is the growth in the church?
It's not there.
Your path is already made for you.
That's right.
Your path is already made for you. You know who you are, where you're going, what's expected of you, and what happens if you don't do those things.
Bye-bye. You're out. There's no actual real growth.
No.
And they want it that way. Like you say, keep you in your infantile state. If you think outside that box, you're going to see things for what they really are, which, going back to Eve, why have we never questioned our whole lives? There is something called the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Good and evil.
Why would that be a bad thing, to be knowledgeable? Well, because we got to keep people in a box.
Right. And if good is multiplying and replenishing the earth, but evil is having sexual relations, it is cognitive dissonance from the very beginning of time. Exactly. As far as religion is concerned.
Exactly.
Which keeps you gaslighting yourself and questioning yourself and not ever being an authentic person who knows who they are.
If you think about it, it all comes back to sex. I mean, it really does. They hijacked sex. And really think about it. If they can hijack the most basic component of human, of continuing the human race, a basic human need, if they can hijack something that primal and that deep, they can do anything. They can convince you to do anything. They can do anything.
It is 100% manipulation.
It is.
Yeah. And then it has us all second guessing. Like we blindly obey. We don't ask questions like that. Because if you ask questions, you see the hypocrisy and you see how ridiculous it all is.
And along those lines, though, we were talking about this before we started recording too. I know for me, I said this to you, it completely F's with my head, because I go through these periods, even though I'm way outside of it and I've come so far, I still have so many of these moments where I'll see something or hear something and I'm having a conflict about what that means. And I immediately go back to this idea of questioning my own intuition, gaslighting myself, because am I thinking this is a bad thing because I was conditioned to believe this is a bad thing? Or am I thinking this is a good thing because I just want it to be a good thing? And that's a really simplification of like a lot of deep things that I think about. But there are many times where I'll think about things and kind of just have a hard time figuring out, are these my own thoughts? Like, that's how bad it fucks with your head.
Well, if you think about it, is this a prompting from the Holy Ghost, or is this me being influenced by Satan? You've been conditioned to gaslight yourself. No,
you can't win either way.
You choose yourself or you choose the church. We've been conditioned to question ourselves and question our own intuition for our whole lives. We've been conditioned to blindly obey our whole lives. We've been conditioned to believe that good is bad and bad is good, that evil is good and good is evil, right? In the last days, we will be, witnessing that good is evil and evil is good. And what are they applying that to? They're applying that to people having bodily autonomy.
Yep.
They're applying that to people's individual rights and taking away their rights because it's evil to be gay. It's evil to be transgender. It's evil to be anything but this person that fits in this box and does what they're told and are who they have been told that they are, even if it's not who they are.
Yep.
From the beginning of time.
From the beginning of time. And that's why I say it sends me down all the rabbit holes of who made the rules? Who made the rules? Who made any of the rules that we follow? None of them make sense. Well, not none of them, but...
Well, religious rules don't make sense.
Right.
They're created to keep us so busy not accepting each other just as we are and worrying about what somebody else is doing and saying that it's wrong because I do this and it's right. And it creates disconnection.
Mm-hmm.
It creates conflict.
Yep. It creates conflict
Yeah.
and divisiveness and othering.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I talked recently, and you said something so key that what I think you said, connection is the cure, or connection is the answer, something to that along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. Nothing's going to get fixed until we're connected.
Yeah, and nothing is going to get fixed
until we remember that we're connected, because we
yeah,
already
or
are
realize,
connected.
yeah.
Yeah. But with just these
Well,
messages of divide, 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 divide.
right. Well, and that's why, like in religion, they preach, what is the law? The law of that everybody is equitably given, everybody's taken
Oh,
care of, right?
right, right.
The United Order, no, it's not the United Order. Is it the
No,
United Order?
the law of sacrifice, is it? Is
Okay.
this what we're talking
Is
about in the
it?
temple?
Anyway, yeah.
Or
Yeah, I
whatever.
think so. But just that we give all of our time, talents, and all that we've been blessed to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And by doing so, in the last days, we will be taken care of with money that's obsolete, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've been watching the show on HBO about The Last of Us, it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about that is the collapse of civilization. If Jesus comes again, if that's really what's going to happen, which I don't believe that anymore, but that's the threat, right?
Right.
When Jesus comes again, the body or the earth will be cleansed with fire.
Mm-hmm.
The wheat are separated from the tares.
Mm-hmm.
When Jesus comes again, it is going to be an apocalyptic event
Mm-hmm.
that's cleansing the earth with fire. What the hell do we need money for?
We don't. When society rebuilds, it's going to be a barter system.
Yeah. I mean, that's how things started to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have resources that you need. You have resources that I need. Let's trade.
Or even, I mean, the dream would be we don't even have to trade. Let's just take care of everybody in whatever way we need to take care of everybody. Not necessarily, oh, I'm going to do this for you, so you do this for me. Just how about I'm going to do this for you because you're a human and I have the resource to do it. And you in turn have some other resource that's going to help that person over there. So let's just make it happen.
Right. Yeah. But instead, we have organizations that are hoarding money and people who are suffering. And the organizations such as the Mormon Church that have enough money to end world hunger while before the apocalypse or before the second coming of Christ don't do so, even though they profess to be a society of people who takes care of each other. Bishops are told that they have stewardship not only over the members in their ward, but over all the people that live in their ward boundaries.
Yes.
But who are the people that get taken care of? People that go to church and people that will take the discussions. So in order for us to take care of you, you have to do this, which is coercion. So in order for you to get food from the bishop's storehouse, you have to in turn give service or take discussions, and that service has to be approved by the church.
You have to pay it
that's
back.
Right, exactly. So you have to, it's not just we're going to help to take care of you. It is, you have to prove yourself that you need it. Mm-hmm. You have to go through a degrading experience of exposing your finances and the fact that you're poor to be able to qualify for it. So there again, we have conditions. And then you have to, commit to either get the discussion so that you're showing the appearance of wanting to join this church, or you have to do other things to jump through hoops to be able to keep getting food to feed your family.
Yep.
It's all coercion. It's all coercion.
It's all coercion.
There is no unconditional acceptance and taking care of people.
No.
There are all conditions.
It's filled with conditions, a laundry list of conditions. Yeah. It's mind numbing that you as a member of the church over the course of your life maybe have paid. I've heard people say, oh yeah, we look back, we did our finances, we've given over, $300,000-$400,000 to the church.
Yep.
But that one dry spell where we were unemployed, yeah, come down and
pay your tithing first.
Pay your tithing first before you feed your family. And then if you still
or before you pay your rent, or before you pay your electric bill, or your gas bill. And then you're all gaslighted to believe that if I pay my tithing, then this thing that actually was just a coincidence that happened is actually an answer from God and a testimony of tithing.
It's so fucked up. It really is.
Again, attributing things to the church.
And then if you actually still need food, we'll give you some, but get down here and pay it back. You got to work. Sorry that you've paid $300,000 in and contributed to our $400 billion in assets. But you're going to have to pay that back. And not only are you going to have to pay back, but also we're telling everybody that you've got to come clean the church now too, because we're certainly not going to spring for a janitor. Like we could not possibly.
Because it's a calling. It's a calling.
Right.
Yeah.
But they'll wrap it up and disguise it as blessings of service. Come down and take pride in your church building. Come down, clean it, pay service, and you'll receive blessings for that.
Well, that's how the church gets away with. Right. That's how the church gets away with a lot of exploiting people for their skills. Is you have a calling, right?
We're nurses.
So my calling,
all about that.
Yeah, I've been exploited many times. Oh, your calling is to be the girls' camp nurse. So you're going to go and you're going to spend your week. You're going to take a whole week off and you're going to have to take PTO at work. And we're not going to pay you, but we're going to exploit your skills and, all that you've been blessed with. You have to attribute to
the church
and build the Zion
up of the kingdom.
Building up of the kingdom. And so you're shamed if you don't do it. You're you're told you're missing out on blessings. You're told not to say no, not just to boys who ask you to dance when you're a 14-year-old girl, but you don't say no to the church when you are given a calling, because that is meaning that you're turning down blessings.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if
it's all coercion.
If you only get a week of PTO at your job, well, sorry, I guess you're not going on family vacation, or you're not going to get paid to take that time off. We're not going to pay you to do that.
Yeah. And the church is all about families, but really it's only about families that comply and are obedient.
The church is about obedient families. Let's get that.
And about families that fit the mold.
Obedient families can be together forever.
Yes. We should change the words to that song.
We should. We're actually pretty good at changing the words to songs. We've rewritten several songs actually.
Yeah, we just need to sing them.
We haven't released them all yet, but don't worry.
Don't worry, they're coming.
Coming to Spotify near you. Not just kidding. We're not going to go that far.
No.
You can see some of them on our social media.
Yeah.
We have more in the works though. We always have a little document going of lyrics that we're changing.
Yeah.
Yes, obedient families can be together forever.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I don't want to be with my family forever necessarily. So
right. There are certain family members that I would rather not have anything to do with anymore.
Yeah.
Christina and I have a pattern in our conversations that they're usually about 3 hours long.
Oh, look, we're doing good.
And we're coming up on we're coming up on 3 hours, and it kind of feels like we're wrapping up this discussion too,
Yes.
which feels like we've gone down a lot of rabbit holes. But there are a lot of similarities and a lot of connections in the things that we've been talking about just bringing up the pace letter. It's not just about this member of the church who was commissioned to, or was
Assigned.
called to,
Yeah.
assigned to do this project. It goes so deep. It goes all the way back to the beginning of religious time. That the earth was created, Adam and Eve, original sin, lack of consent, disillusionment, indoctrination, not being able to critically think, because the original sin belongs to Eve, who was critical thinking, and we don't want people who think. We want people who obey blindly.
That's right. And I think you, just going back to reiterate something you said earlier that I said it once, I'll say it again. I think it's a great sum up of the entire conversation, that all of it is one large exercise in ritualistic abuse done under consent by coercion, which is not really consent. So it's non-consensual ritualistic abuse. All of it.
All of it. Yeah.
Force, fraud, and coercion.
Yeah. And the church, or religion in general, hides behind their constitutional rights in the First Amendment to be protected from discrimination. And if you think about it, anything that is calling a religion out, so us speaking right now, is going to be considered by church members as discrimination and victimization of them and their beliefs, and they will defend it until they die, or they will defend it until they have an awakening like Christina and I have had, and then have to look back and see all of the things that they perpetuated and defended and believed, and things that they've said to people, feelings they've had about people, the judgments they've passed on other people, and going through dark nights of the soul. And a lot of people, I believe, will choose to stay in the church because it's easier. It is easier. They tell us it's the hard road, but really, it's easier to stay in the church and be oblivious and follow blindly than it is to actually leave it and learn who you really are, and learn all of the atrocities that can be attributed to religion, and all the atrocities specifically that can be attributed to the Mormon church, and all the things they've covered up, and all the ways that they've manipulated and groomed and gaslighted us and taught us how to do that to ourselves. So it is not an easy road to leave religion. It is not an easy road to leave a cult. It is not an easy road. It is. It's very painful. But on the other hand, the view from out here, the connection that is genuine, the authenticity out here is worth every single bit of it.
Yes, it is. I concur.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So
Kindra has spoken. That's a great way to end, I think.
I was born in rose-colored water. It seeped into my eyes and soul, and I didn't know the difference. Being blind was beautiful, but no amount of sweet addiction can stop the force of reality. In the bitter recognition, only you can set you free. anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow. My mother's blood runs through my veins. We haven't spoken years. If we did, maybe I'd ask, what's it like to become your worst fear? And there's two sides to every story, carved by pain and memory. Time will soften all the edges, but it's still stone I keep with me. I don't believe in saints, I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white alike, it's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants